Chapter 939. Mr. You must be joking. I am not Mr.'s match. How would I dare to have any improper thoughts? Unless I'm tired of living. Kai Feng covered her mouth and smiled, brushing the matter aside. Xianxia had never thought of getting to the bottom of this matter. It was just for safety's sake. He wanted to remind Kai Feng not to treat him as a fool and not to play any tricks on the way to Flaming Mountain. He had to be on guard at all times. The two of them continued on their way, but their speed was much faster than when they were in the thick fog. Along the way, the strange mountains and scenery flashed past them rapidly, making Xianxia feel a little overwhelmed. Actually, after leaving the thick fog, they were not far from Flaming Mountain. A journey of 700 or 800 li would not take too much time for the two of them. When they saw the tall, maroon-colored mountain in the distance, Kai Feng suddenly made a hand gesture and stopped. Xianxia stopped as well and asked, "What's wrong?" Kai Feng pointed at the maroon-colored mountain, feeling a little uneasy. She bowed to Xianxia and said, "That's Flaming Mountain. The Ape King lives there. I'll have to trouble Mr. to take care of this matter." Xianxia looked at the maroon-colored mountain that was emitting black smoke in the distance. It was clearly an active volcano. However, he did not find it strange. Since those colossal armed fire apes like to forge things, it was only natural for them to find volcanoes as a place to rest. He frowned and said, "You mean you want me to go alone? You're not going?" Kai Feng rubbed her belly and said, "That Ape King wants to kill me, but I am not his match. Now that I'm pregnant, I really... Don't give me that." Xianxia waved his hand without hesitation and said, "Don't use your pregnancy as an excuse. You've already eaten it, so what else is there to say? Furthermore, I don't know anything about that Ape King. What if you sell him off? Either we go together or we go back together. In any case, it's impossible for me to take the risk alone. Do as you see fit." Kai Feng's hand, which was stroking her round belly, froze. She didn't think that the usually easygoing Xianxia would suddenly become impatient. She looked at the great flaming mountain in the distance and began to waver. She wasn't sure if she should take this risk. Now that things have come to this, there are some things that I might as well make clear. Xianxia clasped his hands behind his back and said indifferently, "It's not a problem for me to help you kill the Ape King, but I can't do it for free. After this, you have to help me get 5,000 inner cores of various fierce beasts. If you agree, we'll continue. If you don't, then forget it." He put on the face of a profiteer who was negotiating terms at the last moment. Seeing this, Kai Feng actually relaxed a little and asked suspiciously, "What do you want 5,000 fierce beast inner cores for?" Xianxia raised his brows and said, "You don't have to worry about that. I naturally have my uses for it. If it weren't for the fact that it's inconvenient for me to travel in the realm of divine ruins as a human, I wouldn't need to ask for your help. You just have to tell me if you agree or not." Kai Feng looked at the great flaming mountain in the distance. After a moment of deliberation, she gritted her teeth and said, "Fine, I agree. As long as you can help me kill the Ape King, leave the 5,000 inner cores of various fierce beasts to me." "You're wrong." Xianxia waved his finger and said, "The two of us are going to kill the Ape King together. You're so afraid of the Ape King, it makes me wonder if the Ape King is really as weak as you say. Don't tell me you're deliberately sending me to my death." Kai Feng couldn't help but find it funny when she heard this. This man was afraid of wolves in front of him and tigers behind him. It turned out that he was a coward who put on a brave front. She immediately said with a serious expression, "Mister, you're thinking too much. What I mean is that I want to join forces with Mr. to kill the Ape King. When Mr. sees the Ape King later, just release your purple fire to burn it. You must know that the power of the purple fire is extraordinary. Then it's a deal. If you dare to go back on your word, don't blame me for being impolite." Xianxia waved his hand and said, "Let's go." The two of them immediately flew toward the great flaming mountain. The great flaming mountain was built in the shape of a cone. The dome was caved in and black smoke was rising from it. There wasn't a single trace of green on the mountain, and people could feel the rolling heat waves from 1,000 meters away. There were many caves on the mountain, and from time to time, strong apes with fiery red fur could be seen walking in and out of the caves. Compared to other beasts, these animals were only a little more than 2 meters tall, so they couldn't be considered tall. However, their strong arms were very long, almost reaching the ground. When their palms were opened, they were bigger than basins, and when they clenched their fists, they looked like 2 iron hammers. This should be the giant strength fire ape. Yu Qianqiu floated in the air and silently watched the movements on the mountain. He then tilted his head and looked at Kai Feng. He nodded slightly, indicating that they could begin. Kai Feng clenched her teeth and shouted, "Old monkey, get out here." The sound waves spread out, startling the fire apes that were going in and out of the caves. When they saw the two people in the air, the fire apes on the mountain bared their teeth and roared at the sky. They clenched their fists and pounded their chests like drums. They then ran into the caves. When they came out again, there were more of them, and they were all wearing bright armor. They held metal spears in their hands and waved them in the air to demonstrate their power. However, they couldn't fly yet, so they could only worry about the intruders. Soon, a burly man walked out of the biggest cave on the mountainside. His red hair was flying in the wind, and he was dressed rather strangely. He was wearing a pair of gray pants and a pair of light golden metal boots. His upper body was bare, but he was also wearing a light golden metal vest. His arms were exposed. The burly man with red hair waved his arms, and the fire apes that were roaring and demonstrating on the great flaming mountain immediately shut up. The noise instantly disappeared. The red-haired man looked at the sky and immediately laughed heartily. "I was wondering who dared to come here to provoke us. It turns out it's you, big spider." As he spoke, he patted the metal vest on his chest and said, "I was just worrying about the lack of materials. The armor I forged wasn't complete and I couldn't find you big spiders. I didn't expect you to come to me personally." Yu Qianqiu glanced at Kai Feng. It seemed that she wasn't lying about this. This ape king was really using their shells to forge things. Kai Feng gritted her teeth and said, "Old monkey, don't be so arrogant. Today will be the day you die." "Then I'd like to see." Before he finished speaking, the ape king had already teleported into the air and stood in front of the two of them. He looked at Yu Qianqiu and said, "I was wondering why you were so brave. So you found a helper. You're a human?" Yu Qianqiu smiled faintly and nodded. He said, "You're the ape king?" The ape king sized up Yu Qianqiu and realized that he couldn't see through Yu Qianqiu's cultivation. His expression became serious and he replied in a sonorous voice, "That's right, that's me." As the two of them were talking, Kai Feng was getting anxious. She kept giving Yu Qianqiu looks, hinting for him to take the opportunity to use the purple flames to attack. However, she realized that Yu Qianqiu was acting like he didn't see it. She immediately dragged him into the water. "Kill him, Yu Qianqiu." The ape king glanced at Kai Feng but didn't pay much attention to her. Right now, most of his attention was focused on Yu Qianqiu. He said in a low voice, "You're here to kill me? Do you think so?" Yu Qianqiu smiled. As soon as he said that, Kai Feng immediately panicked. The ape king stared at him with its big eyes and said tentatively, "If you're not, then I'm going to cut this big spider into 8 pieces. Do as you wish. Actually, I'm not related to her. I've just heard of the ape king's name for a long time. I'm just finding an excuse to let her lead the way." Yu Qianqiu raised his hand at Kai Feng, indicating that she could do whatever she wanted. Kai Feng immediately shouted angrily, "Yu Qianqiu, you lied to me." As she spoke, she quickly turned into a stream of light and fled. *TV. Since you're here, don't even think about running away. The ape king looked at Yu Qianqiu cautiously. Seeing that he didn't move, it immediately chased after him while laughing. Yu Qianqiu turned around and looked. He shook his head and sighed. "Do you think I'm that easy to use? Since you have ulterior motives, I can only accompany you." Then he flew toward the two people who were chasing after him. In order to not let the ape king misunderstand, he deliberately slowed down. "Hey, stay here." A loud shout rang out like a bolt from the blue. A huge fist appeared out of nowhere and smashed heavily into the back of the escaping Kai Feng. Bang! Kai Feng's body fell rapidly from the opponent's punch. However, its carapace was tough, so it was not affected by the heavy punch. However, she knew that she couldn't escape. She could only fight with her life on the line. Her falling body stabilized, and with a flash of red light, she revealed her original form of a ferocious giant spider. She flew up again like an octopus, brandishing her dagger and pouncing toward the ape king. The ape king immediately laughed and said, "Good timing." Just as he spread his arms to counterattack, he saw the giant spider suddenly spit out a monstrous yellow smoke from its mouth. This was not the ape king's first time fighting with the temple rainbow spider. Naturally, he knew how powerful the yellow smoke was. It was a highly toxic substance. If he breathed in even a little, his entire body would immediately fester and he would die. The Ape King didn't dare to be careless. With a shake of its body, a torrential fiery red flame emerged from its body and wrapped its entire body. It rushed towards the yellow smoke, causing the yellow smoke to sizzle on the spot. As soon as he rushed into the yellow smoke, he saw a mess of golden daggers slashing toward him. The Ape King's movements in the air were extremely agile. Instead of retreating, he advanced, completely unafraid of the sharpness of the daggers. He stretched out his wide palm and found a place to strike. He grabbed one of the giant spider's sharp limbs and flashed to the back of the giant spider. The giant spider immediately panicked and struggled in the air. However, the Ape King stomped his foot and stood firmly on its back as if he had grown roots. There was no way he could get rid of him. Thereupon he flipped his other sharp limb and swung it behind him. The Ape King laughed aloud and easily caught the limb in his hand. Standing on the giant spider's back, the Ape King grabbed one of the spider's legs with each of his hands. He exhaled and pulled the two sharp claws like he was rowing a boat. He forcefully pulled them in a figure-8 shape. Crack! The giant spider let out a blood-curdling screech. Both of its sharp claws had been directly pulled off by the Ape King. Xianxia, who had just arrived, shook his head in amazement when he saw this scene. The Rainbow Temple spider's claws were so hard that it couldn't be broken with brute force. However, the Ape King was clearly very experienced in dealing with these large spiders. It knew where the spider's hard carapace was, and it easily broke the spider's claws at the joints. Chapter 940. At this moment, the Ape King attacked the spider's shield with its own spear. The two sharp claws in its hands were pierced into the giant spider's hard back, and the giant spider let out a shrill screech that made one's scalp go numb. The Ape King was in for a penny, and it didn't show any mercy when it started attacking. It took advantage of the giant spider's desperate struggle to attack continuously. In the blink of an eye, the Ape King was as fast as lightning on the giant spider's back. 6 of the giant spider's 8 sharp limbs had already been broken, and they were all pierced into the giant spider's back. The giant spider knew that it was already at death's door, and it was scared out of its wits. It used all of its skills to roll around in the sky. The Ape King let it do whatever it wanted, and its red hair fluttered majestically as if it had roots under its feet. It broke off another 2 limbs, pierced one into the giant spider's back and held the other in its hand. It then flashed to the joint between the giant spider's head and neck. Xianxia's eyes flickered and he knew that the Ape King was going to give the giant spider the final fatal blow. His gaze suddenly swept past the spider eggs that were like yellow leather balls stuck on the giant spider's abdomen, and he immediately shouted, "Ape King, don't destroy the spider eggs on her abdomen. I still have use for them." The Ape King's red hair fluttered in the wind. He looked very tall and sturdy. He glanced at him and raised his hand to stab down. With a kacha sound, the stab directly pierced into the gap between the spider's head and neck. The stab almost caused the spider's entire head to fall off. The giant spider's back had already been pierced 7 times, and with the fatal blow on its neck, the screeching sound was immediately cut off. The Ape King then bent its body and stretched out its wide palm to break the edge of the giant spider's carapace on the back of its neck. It flipped the giant spider over in the air, and it lifted the giant spider with a single palm before flying toward the flaming mountain at high speed. Xianxia chuckled and immediately flew after it. When the 2 of them returned to the flaming mountain, they immediately landed in front of the biggest cave on the mountainside. The giant spider's dead body was supported by 8 broken limbs on the ground. The Ape King walked out from under the broken limbs and it looked at Xianxia. The red-furred and armored apes on the great flaming mountain immediately brandished the metal spears in their hands and roared excitedly when they saw the great Ape King's bravery. However, they were stopped by the great Ape King with a wave of his hand. Xianxia walked around the dead spider a few times while clicking his tongue. He even crawled under the spider's huge body to take a look. Because the spider's 8 limbs were a few meters long, there was enough space underneath. The Ape King's gaze followed him all the time. He couldn't figure out if this person was a friend or foe. However, Xianxia's calm attitude made him even more wary. He was really unfathomable. After circling a few rounds, Xianxia jumped onto the giant spider's belly, which was facing the sky. There were thousands of spider eggs stuck on its belly. Each of them was yellow and as big as a fist, and they looked like rubber balls. Suddenly, Xianxia was attracted by something. He squatted down to take a look and saw that there were small spiders swimming around in the slightly transparent spider egg. Brother Ape. Xianxia squatted down and stretched his head out. He waved his hand and said, "Come up, I have something to ask." The Ape King's expression twitched, but it still came up. It asked with a vigilant gaze, "What are you trying to do?" Xianxia didn't mind the distance between him and the Ape King. He had always believed that relationships were nurtured. He stood up and pointed at the spider eggs. "Can these little guys still live?" The Ape King glanced at the thousands of spider eggs and said after a pause, "They have already formed in the eggs. I reckon that they will break out of the eggs soon. As long as they don't cause too much damage and are removed carefully, they should be able to survive." "Is that so?" Xianxia squatted down again. He hugged a spider egg with both hands and started to play with it carefully. At first he was worried that the spider egg was too fragile and would break. Later on he realized that his worries were completely groundless. This thing could withstand the battle between the big spiders and the Ape King without breaking. Its skin was extraordinarily tough. He plucked one and held it in his hands. He looked at it against the sunlight for a while. The small spider inside was soaked in a ball of liquid and was happily waving its claws around. Xianxia immediately sent it into Utopia and quickly picked up the other spider eggs. "You want to hatch these spiders?" The Ape King stared at his actions and said with a frown, "These spiders are naturally ferocious. In addition, their shells are hard and they have sharp claws and teeth. They don't have any natural enemies. Once they breed on a large scale, it will be a disaster for other animals. A long time ago our fire ape race suffered from their cruelty. If they encounter a situation where there isn't enough food, they will even kill each other and eat each other. Can be said that they are innately ferocious. They shouldn't exist in this world." Xianxia, who had already picked up most of the spider eggs, turned to look at the Ape King. He finally knew why the Ape King was so ruthless toward the temple rainbow spiders. Other than the fact that their shells could be used to forge things, it was also because of their racial hatred. He coughed and waved his hand. He sighed and said with pity, "The hatred of the previous generation shouldn't be passed on to the next generation. The children are innocent. Don't worry, I'll discipline them well. I won't let them come out and cause trouble again." After saying that, he continued to pick up the remaining spider eggs. His words sounded nice, but no one knew if he really wanted to discipline these small spiders and not let them come out and cause trouble, or if he wanted to domesticate these small spiders to cause trouble. God knew when he had become so compassionate. The Ape King was speechless after hearing what he said. It wanted to stop him, but it wasn't confident at all. It could only watch as Xianxia picked up all the spider eggs. Xianxia, who had a small harvest, jumped down from the big spider's abdomen after he was done. He waved at the Ape King and said, "Brother Ape, come down first." The Ape King jumped down in confusion. It saw Xianxia twisting one of the spider's broken legs that was propping itself up. With a bang, the big spider's body instantly flipped to the ground. Xianxia jumped onto the big spider's back. He hugged the spider's legs that were stuck in the big spider's back. He pulled them out one by one and put them away. Finally, he walked to the big spider's head. He used his hand as a knife and covered it with a layer of purple light. With a swing of his hand, he cut off the big teeth in the spider's mouth. This scene made the Ape King suck in a cold breath. He was terrified. He was well aware of the toughness of the divine temple rainbow spider's carapace, especially the teeth on the head and the 8 legs, which were incomparably hard. Who would have thought that with a wave of Xianxia's hand he would actually cut off the teeth like a knife cutting through tofu? Just how high was this person's cultivation? The Ape King's eyes flickered. It locked onto the purple light on Xianxia's palm. It fell into deep thought. It had already guessed that it was because of that purple light. After Xianxia was done, he rubbed his hands together excitedly. He pointed at the spider's body that had lost its legs and teeth and looked like a ball of meat. He said, "Brother Ape, I don't want the carapace on this fellow. It should be enough for you to refine armor. T. The best things have been taken away by you." The Ape King was speechless. He gave a perfunctory in a protesting tone. He didn't express any opinion. He hoped that this fellow who came out of nowhere would leave as soon as possible. However, Xianxia's awareness was not very high sometimes. He stared at the Ape King from head to toe as if he was very familiar with him. Actually, the Ape King's appearance was filled with a first-class manly aura. He had thick eyebrows, big eyes that were bright and full. His face shape was generous, his cheekbones were plump and his lips were thick. He gave off a feeling of righteousness. The only flaw was the stubble on his chin. However, it made him look more manly. Especially when a gust of wind blew his red hair on his burly figure, he gave off a feeling that he was a man of indomitable spirit. If he were to be compared with Nongzhu, he definitely wouldn't be as handsome as Nongzhu. However, Yu Qianzhou preferred to look at men like the Ape King. The Ape King was the kind of man that exuded manliness. If he were to be placed in the human world, he would be a man that women would go crazy for. What do you want? The Ape King frowned. The other party's gaze kept sizing up his vest and boots, causing him to suspect that after the other party took away the good things on the temple rainbow pearl, he had also taken a fancy to the things on his body. Sure enough, after Yu Qianzhou laughed awkwardly for a while, he pointed to the metal vest on his body and said, "I've long heard that Brother Ape is good at forging things. I wonder if you can take off your armor for me to see? There's nothing to look at if it's a shoddy job." Although the Ape King said this, he was a little proud in his heart. No one in the ruins of God would study this thing. Fighting or anything like that depended on one's cultivation and talent. He had only accidentally seen a human who had entered the ruins of God using the earth fire to refine an artifact. Out of curiosity, he had the heart to study it, and gradually he had found some ways to do so. "Brother Ape, could it be that you're afraid that I'll take away what you love? Don't worry, I'm just taking a look." Yu Qianzhou patted his chest and guaranteed. The Ape King was no longer stingy. With a complacent heart, he took off his vest and handed it over to Yu Qianzhou. Yu Qianzhou smiled as he extended his hand to receive it. He discovered that it was extremely heavy in his hand, so heavy that it was hard to believe. He accidentally fell to the ground with a clang sound, directly smashing a small hole in the ground. When this incompetent performance fell into the eyes of the fire ape who was watching from the mountain, it immediately caused a burst of wild laughter. The Ape King was also slightly startled. He felt that with the other party's cultivation he shouldn't be unable to even lift this thing. Yu Qianzhou did not mind the ridicule around him. He did not care about his face to the point of arguing with a group of monkeys. It was not that he could not lift it, it was just that he had been careless for a moment. He did not expect that a thin vest would actually weigh 10,000 kilograms. Compared to the ratio of volume and weight, this was the heaviest thing he had seen other than the divine sword. A trace of surprise flashed across Yu Qianzhou's face. He then casually waved his hand towards the ground, and the maroon mountain rocks surged out like a fountain, directly arching up to a waist-high conical mound. On top of it was the light golden metal vest. The surrounding fire ape's mocking laughter immediately stopped, and the Ape King's gaze also continuously sized up the rising mound. Chapter 941. Yu Qianzhou was not in the mood to care about what they thought. He circled around the vest and looked at it, touching it. The reason why he had agreed to meet the Ape King was because he had heard from her that the Ape King was good at forging things. That was why he had come. There was no other reason. He now had the intention to create a batch of excellent weapons and equipment for the Utopia army under him. With Qin Feng's refining skills, he could no longer keep up with everyone's improvement speed. Actually, this was not the most important thing. He would never look down on his brothers for having low standards. If their standards were low, he could think of ways to get resources to help them improve. However, Qin Feng had already deteriorated. He was a completely different person from the Qin Feng who looked at life with a smile. He had been ruined by that seemingly pure and cute woman who was now hateful. He had discovered a few times that Xiao Wanqing was stirring up trouble and even sowing discord in front of Chu Ping. He almost could not help but kill her. The entire Utopia was under his control. If he really wanted to pay attention, nothing would be able to hide from him. However, he tolerated it for Qin Feng's sake. After all, Qin Feng was his first brother. If he did not take the final step, he was still a person of flesh and blood. He could not do that. Secondly, he was the one who had made the union between the two of them back then. If there was a mistake, he would also bear a lot of responsibility. He could not ruin Qin Feng's life and then kill him just because he did not like him. He could only hope that some people would behave themselves and give them enough time to consider themselves. They would not drift apart. Even if they could not get along in the end, it would be fine if they went their separate ways. Some things were not good to be ruthless. That would hurt both sides. There was another important reason. He also wanted to make use of Xiao Wanqing to see if Chu Ping'er could pass the test. Cultivation was endless. Apart from feelings, everyone was going to spend the rest of their lives together. If she did not act like a mistress, she would only cause trouble in the backyard. How could she have the right to be a mistress? Therefore he had been watching coldly from the side and allowed things to develop. Xianxia had come to see how the Ape King's craftsmanship was and if he was satisfied. In the end, he discovered that the level of refinement was indeed not that great. But to be able to make such a thin vest so heavy, it would be unreasonable to say that he did not have some skill. He turned around and asked, "Brother Ape, how's the defense of your armor? If an ordinary person wants to break this armor of mine, it's no different from a fool's dream." An early-stage Immortal Emperor expert, White Rhinoceros King, once struck this armor with all his strength, but it only left a slight dent on it. Ape King's complacent voice stopped abruptly. He saw that terrifying purple light appeared on Xianxia's palm again. He hurriedly stopped Ape King. "Wait, you are not an ordinary person." When Xianxia heard that even an early-stage Immortal Emperor expert could only leave a small dent on it, he couldn't help but want to use his purple fire to test it out. However, the Ape King wasn't willing to. He smiled and said, "Don't worry, I'm just trying. I won't destroy your treasure." "Don't." The Ape King snatched the armor back and quickly wore it. Then he pointed to the corpse of the huge spider at the side and said, "There's no need to try. This armor of mine is made from the shells of over 5,000 mature temple rainbow spiders. If you can break its shell so easily, my armor will probably not be able to withstand it." Over 5,000 mature temple rainbow spider shells were used to forge such a small thing? Xianxia said in disbelief. No wonder it was so heavy. Then he pointed to the boots on the Ape King's feet and said, "If I'm not wrong, this should be the same material as the armor you are wearing. Is it included in the 5,000? I used over 3,000 of these boots." The Ape King explained, "Don't be fooled by the large number of boots I used. They were all refined by me countless times before I got rid of the impurities and extracted the essence. I used the shell essence of the temple rainbow spiders to forge them." "Armor essence?" Xianxia muttered, guessing that it was the essence of the temple rainbow spider's carapace. He rolled his eyes and said, "I won't hide it from Brother Ape. I have a friend who is an expert in this path and is also in the ruins of God. If Brother Ape doesn't mind, I can invite him over. You two might as well spar on this path." He believed that since he was someone who was obsessed with this path, he would definitely have an unusual fanaticism towards it. It should be of some use if he catered to his liking. Sure enough, as soon as the Ape King heard that there was someone who was proficient in this path in the ruins of God, his eyes lit up and he laughed heartily. "Brother you, I wonder if your friend is far from here. If it's convenient, why don't you come over and have a chat? It's good for everyone to learn from each other." As expected, their relationship became much closer, and they were already calling each other Brother you. "Not far, not far. Brother Ape, please wait a moment. I'll find him right away." Xianxia said this and immediately turned into a ray of light and flew away. For safety's sake, he threw down a small silver ball on the way and disappeared. In the depths of the purple bamboo forest in the southern sea, Xianxia quietly appeared and looked around. The purple bamboo was faint, the cold fragrance lingered, and the spiritual energy was dense, like a paradise on earth. The purple bamboo forest was still the purple bamboo forest, but he didn't know how the people here were doing. He had been busy all this time and hadn't been here for a long time. He then flashed towards the direction of the Bamboo Lang blessed land. Just as he got closer, he heard two familiar voices talking, and Xianxia immediately stopped. With his current cultivation, if he wanted to hide and not be discovered, no one would be able to discover him. In the courtyard of the Bamboo Lang blessed land, Z leaned against an old bamboo pole that supported the bamboo archway at the entrance of the courtyard. She lazily looked at Hibiscus, who was sitting cross-legged on the stone platform, and asked, "Hibiscus, does that big liar not want you anymore? Why hasn't he come to see you for so long?" Hibiscus's face was indifferent and she smiled with certainty. "He won't." "Are you so sure?" Ziyi's spirit was lifted and she quickly walked to the stone platform. She squeezed her butt onto it and asked with bright eyes, "When my master came back last time, he said that the big liar is not a good person. Do you think that he would like a more beautiful woman outside?" Hearing this, Xianxia smiled bitterly. That old handsome brother Nongzhu was probably still angry about what happened last time. He shook his head and looked at Hibiscus to see how she would answer. However, once he heard it, he was immediately moved to a mess. I don't know. Hibiscus smiled with satisfaction. He told me to wait for him in the Southern Sea purple bamboo forest, so I'll wait for him here. I'll do whatever he asks me to do, and wherever he asks me to go, I'll go. That expression and tone, it was as if to be able to quietly wait for her man to come back was the happiest thing in the world, even if he really abandoned her. What a silly girl. Ze sat on the stone platform, and her legs under her purple skirt swung back and forth. She pouted and said, "You'll go wherever he asks you to go? That big liar loves money the most. Be careful that he'll trick you and sell you off one day. Then he must be doing that for my sake." Hibiscus tilted her head and said after thinking for a while. She couldn't think of any reason for Xianxia to harm her. Ziyi's eyes widened immediately. She was tongue-tied and said, "He sold you out for your own good. It seems that you've really been deceived by that big liar. That guy is too cunning. He's rotten to the core." Who? Which be asterisk he is bad-mouthing me again. Xianxia walked out from the cobblestone path of the purple bamboo forest with a dark face. Anyone who heard someone bad-mouthing him as soon as they arrived would be unhappy. The two girls turned around at the same time. Surprise appeared on their faces at the same time, and they both got off the stone platform. Ze, who had just completely denied a certain person's character, ran faster than anyone else when she saw a certain person. She flashed to Xianxia's side and said with surprise, "Big liar, why are you here?" Xianxia's face darkened even more. He grimaced and said, "Shut your stinky mouth. What did I lie to you about?" Z didn't get angry when she was scolded. Instead, she was very happy. She stuck out her bright red tongue and said, "In any case, you're a big liar." Xianxia. Hibiscus stood under the bamboo sign with the words, "Zhu Lang blessed land," and shouted in joy. Xianxia, who was glaring angrily at Ze and was about to explode, was instantly hooked by Hibiscus's shout. He directly ignored Ze and revealed a smile. He opened his arms and walked quickly towards Hibiscus. Hibiscus took a few steps forward and welcomed him. Then she hugged him. Ze, who was thrown behind, immediately pouted. It was not a problem for her to hang an oil bottle. "Are you all right? No one bullied you, right?" Xianxia greedily took a deep breath of the body fragrance that he dreamed about and asked. His palm lightly patted Hibiscus's back. This girl could always give him the simplest, most honest, most sincere and most pure feelings. If she didn't exist in his life, what meaning would there be in it? Xianxia closed his eyes and thought about it. He couldn't help but hug her even tighter. He wanted to hug her into his bones and never separate from her in this life. "No, everyone is very good to me." Hibiscus closed her eyes and muttered in satisfaction. This embrace was also the most peaceful harbor that she dreamed about. Every time she was in this harbor, she would forget all the troubles and worries in the world. Z walked to the side of the two and snorted coldly, hugging in broad daylight. How shameless. However, there was no place for her in this two-person world. The two of them didn't hear what she said. "Good." Xianxia patted her back. He opened his eyes and gently pushed her away. Then he held her hands and carefully looked at her face. He smiled warmly and said, "My hibiscus is becoming more and more beautiful. Do you like it?" Hibiscus was overjoyed. Xianxia reached out and touched her nose. He smiled and said, "The more I look at you, the more I like you. I will like you forever. No one can stop me." Hibiscus hugged his arm and leaned her head on his shoulder. She said sweetly, "Me too." In the courtyard of Xian, Nongzhu and ancestor Nanming had already been attracted by the commotion here. Nanming ancestor shook his head and chuckled as he watched this scene. Nongzhu's face darkened, especially when she saw Ze standing there in a shady manner. Her face darkened and she immediately shouted, "Sect leader, you busy man you, why are you so free to visit my tiny purple bamboo forest in the Southern Sea today?" Chapter 942. The resentment in Nongzhu's tone was not ordinary. Xianxia smiled bitterly at Furong. Furong smiled sweetly and stepped aside. Who said she was stupid? Actually, she knew everything in her heart. She just didn't want to trouble her man. Xianxia walked into Xian courtyard slowly. He walked to Nongzhu and looked around. He sighed, "This is the best. I envy you." Nongzhu sneered and said, "You don't come to me without a reason. Just say it. What are you doing here? If you don't have anything to say, get out. I don't welcome you here." He was forced to leave in the immortal world. Now that he was forced to come to his territory, he naturally had to take revenge. Get out. What a joke. Xianxia pointed to the sky disapprovingly and said, "The land under the sky is mine. No one has the ability to make me get out. Don't make trouble. If you anger me, I will burn down the entire purple bamboo forest. Do you believe me?" Nongzhu's expression froze. He knew this guy too well. There was nothing he didn't dare to do in this world. Suddenly, Nongzhu raised his hands and howled at the sky, "Old Bai. If you are not dead, come back and have a look. Once you leave, your disciple doesn't care about me anymore. You are bullying me. Old Bai, come back and have a look. I have been living a very sullen life." He was also a smart man. When the hard way didn't work, he immediately used the soft way. However, it didn't match his image and temperament as an old handsome man. Ziyi saw her master's action and was stunned. She felt that her master was acting shamelessly. She was immediately flustered. Ancestor Nanming looked at the two of them and shook his head. He knew that they would not become enemies no matter how much they quarreled. He laughed and said, "What happened between you two? Why do you act like enemies the moment you see each other?" Although Nongzhu was forced to come back, he still kept his mouth shut about what happened in the immortal world. "Ignore him." Xianxia looked at Grandmaster Nanming and said, "I came here especially to look for you. Let's talk in private." As he said this, he pointed to the depths of purple bamboo forest. "Looking for me?" Patriarch Nanming was stunned. Nongzhu's sorrowful voice was immediately cut off. She looked at Xianxia curiously and interrupted, "You came all the way to Nanming? Did something happen?" Xianxia thought about it and felt that there was no need to hide this matter from Nongzhu. He immediately set up a soundproof enchantment to cover the three of them. He looked at Nongzhu and said, "Senior Nongzhu, do you still remember the Divine Ruin Realm?" Grandmaster Nanming looked a little confused. He did not know about the Divine Ruin Realm. Nongzhu asked curiously, "I remember. Why? Then I'll have to trouble Senior Nongzhu to tell Senior Nanming about what happened in the Divine Ruin Realm and the Immortal World," Xianxia said with a solemn expression. Ancestor Nanming asked suspiciously, "What Divine Ruin Realm? The place you went to last time? Isn't it the Immortal World?" Old Nanming is like this. Since Xianxia had said so, Nongzhu had no more scruples. After all, it was uncomfortable to hide something from a friend. She immediately told him about what happened in the Divine Ruin Realm and the Immortal World. After listening, Grandmaster Nanming could not help but sigh. After everyone cultivated to the soul formation stage, it was not an exaggeration to say that life was boring. He did not expect to miss out on such a bizarre and wonderful experience. Thinking about it, it was not unrelated to Nongzhu's obstruction. Just as he was about to complain, he heard Xianxia say, "We human cultivators are weak in the immortal world. We are in danger of being annihilated at any time, so we have to work together and work hard to become stronger." Senior Nanming is considered a person of virtue and prestige in the human world. This time I came all the way to find Senior Nanming, hoping that Senior Nanming can help us gain a foothold in the immortal world. Of course. After Grandmaster Nanming nodded, he asked hesitantly, "But with my cultivation, I'm afraid I won't be of much use in the immortal world. Could it be that you want me to refine magic treasures for everyone?" "Something like that. It's like this." Xianxia sorted out his thoughts and said, "This time I returned to the Divine Ruin Realm and went deep into a place that we didn't dare to enter last time. By chance I met an ape king whose cultivation has reached the early stage of the Great Immortal Realm. This ape king has a unique skill in the art of refining, and the things he refines are really not to be underestimated. I would like to invite Senior Nanming to communicate with him and see if he can learn his skills. Then he can be of some use to us who are struggling in the immortal world." When Nanming heard this, he pondered for a moment and did not say anything. It seemed that he was not very interested in the Ape King's unique skill in refining. This greatly exceeded Xianxia's expectations. Logically speaking, people who were obsessed with this path should be somewhat fanatical and should not be indifferent. Could it be that Senior Nanming is unwilling? Xianxia smiled awkwardly. If this matter was forced, it would really be a little troublesome. "It's not that I'm unwilling." Grandmaster Nanming pondered and said, "If there are enough materials for refining and my cultivation can also reach a certain realm, to refine some powerful treasures for us cultivators in the human world, we don't have to secretly learn other people's skills. Our own skills are enough." When Yu Qianqiu and Nongzhu heard this, they looked at each other and thought that this old fellow was really confident. Grandmaster Nanming looked at the two of them and knew what they were thinking. He probably thought that he was boasting. After a moment of hesitation, he slowly asked, "The two of you have stayed in the immortal world before. There used to be a great refining sect in the immortal world called Mythical Fire Palace. I wonder if it still exists?" Mythical Fire Palace? Yu Qianqiu and Nongzhu cried out in surprise at the same time. Then they looked at each other and their eyes told each other that they had not told him anything about the immortal world. Nongzhu thought about it for a moment. She had just told Grandmaster Nanming about the Divine Ruin Realm and the immortal world in a simple and clear manner. She had not mentioned anything about the Mythical Fire Palace at all. Yu Qianqiu also recalled what Nongzhu had said just now and confirmed that she had not mentioned the Mythical Fire Palace. Nongzhu looked Grandmaster Nanming up and down and said, "Old man Nanming, how do you know that there is a mythical fire palace in the immortal world? Did someone tell you anything?" "During this period of time I have been staying in the South Sea Purple Bamboo Forest. Even you have been hiding it from me. Naturally no one has told me anything." Grandmaster Nanming sighed slightly and said, "In that case the mythical fire palace in the immortal world still exists." Yu Qianqiu's gaze fell on Grandmaster Nanming's red hair, red beard and red eyebrows. He rubbed his chin and nodded thoughtfully. He seemed to have thought of something and immediately raised his elbow to nudge Nongzhu and said, "What is your impression of Hui Yunlong from the Mythical Fire Palace when you first saw him?" Nongzhu was stunned and her mouth was slightly agape. When she first saw Hui Yunlong she had felt strange. Why did this kid look so much like Grandmaster Nanming? Those who did not know would have thought that they were father and son. After thinking about it she could not help but cry out in surprise, "Old man Nanming, could it be that you came from the Mythical Fire Palace in the immortal world?" Yu Qianqiu on the other hand frowned. If Grandmaster Nanming came from the Mythical Fire Palace, then he would not have asked whether the Mythical Fire Palace still existed in the immortal world. However, he must have some connection with the Mythical Fire Palace. As expected, Grandmaster Nanming sighed softly and said, "It's not that I came from the Mythical Fire Palace. It's my ancestor who came from the Mythical Fire Palace. I have never mentioned this secret to anyone. Now that the path to the immortal world has been opened, there is no harm in telling the two of you. However, I beg you to help me keep it a secret." "Of course, tell us quickly." Nongzhu's eyes shone as she nodded repeatedly. She had always been quite interested in the privacy of others. However, Yu Qianqiu asked in a low voice, "Could it be that your ancestor is related to the Myriad Swords demon monarch who fought a fierce battle between the immortal world and the netherworld 100,000 years ago?" "How do you know?" Grandmaster Nanming was stunned. Yu Qianqiu smiled and said, "I guessed." Actually, he knew better than anyone that if Grandmaster Nanming's ancestor came from the Mythical Fire Palace in the immortal world, then he must have come during the great battle 100,000 years ago. After that, the immortal ascension stage was sealed, and the people of the immortal world could not come down at all. If they wanted to come to the human world through the netherworld, regardless of whether the netherworld was willing to let them or not, as long as the gate to the netherworld was opened, the demon ghost region's torture master would definitely know about it. However, none of the previous torture masters had mentioned this matter, so the only possible conclusion was 100,000 years ago. He guessed correctly. Grandmaster Nanming sighed slightly and said, "The Mythical Fire Palace in the immortal world was first founded by two people. The eldest was called Huolai and the second was Hujun. They were brothers born from the same mother. After the founding of the Mythical Fire Palace, the eldest Huolai was called the Grand Palace Lord, and the second Hujun was called the Second Palace Lord. Then the Myriad Swords demon monarch appeared out of nowhere. Immortal Emperor Jin Tai and Emperor of the Underworld Bai Qi joined forces to fight, but they still could not defeat him. Hence they each gathered people from both worlds to fight against the Myriad Swords demon monarch. The high-ranking sects in the immortal world all received an order from the Immortal Palace. Each sect had to send a person with the highest cultivation other than the sect master to participate in the battle, or else they would be severely punished. Nongzhu shook her head and said, "I don't know what the Immortal Emperor was thinking. The people with the highest cultivation in the immortal world were naturally the sect masters. Wouldn't it be better to just ask them to participate in the battle? They would be more useful." "I don't know about this. The ancestors' records didn't explain this," Grandmaster Nanming said. Yu Qianqiu pondered and said, The situation at that time was already very dangerous. Everyone knew how powerful the Demon Lord of Swords was. They all knew that fighting with him was no different from sending themselves to death. If the Immortal Emperor directly summoned the sect masters to participate in the battle, it might have the opposite effect. Don't think that the people in the immortal world are good people. They will submit to whoever's fist is harder. At that time, the Demon Lord of Swords was the most powerful. If Jin Tai sent the sect masters to their deaths, then the sect masters might turn around and help the Demon Lord of Swords to fight Jin Tai. At least their chances of survival would be much higher. Jin Tai naturally didn't just rely on his fist to rule the entire immortal world. He definitely wasn't that stupid. He should understand this and wouldn't let himself fall into a situation where he was surrounded by enemies. You're so cunning. I can tell that you and Jin Tai are the same kind of people. Both of you are not good people, Nongzhu said in disdain. She then said to Grandmaster Nanming, Old Man Nanming, continue. Chapter 943. Old Ancestor Nanming nodded and said, The Immortal Palace's request is to send the person with the highest cultivation other than the sect leader to participate in the war. This request is not a problem for other sects, but for the Mythical Fire Palace, it is a big problem. Because the situation of the Mythical Fire Palace is special, the two palace lords are similar to the sect leader, so they have always been equal. Therefore they asked the Immortal Palace if they could keep both palace lords. But the Immortal Palace's attitude is very firm. They can only keep one sect leader unless there is someone with a higher cultivation than them. But the two of them are the founders of the Mythical Fire Palace, so there is no one in the Mythical Fire Palace who has a higher cultivation than them. In this way, one of them has to participate in the war. So, your ancestor is one of the two founders of the Mythical Fire Palace? Nongzhu touched her chin and laughed. Old Man Nanming, I really didn't know that you have such a big background. Old Ancestor Nanming frowned and said, The Immortal Palace is powerful, so there was no other way. Second Palace Lord Huojun took the initiative to participate in the war. The Grand Palace Lord Huolai was very touched, so he asked second brother to stay and decided to go alone. Anyway, both of them are in the early Immortal Emperor stage, so it doesn't matter who stays. But in the end, second brother listed all kinds of reasons and insisted on going, so the first brother had no choice but to agree. But unexpectedly, on the eve of departure, second brother got into a dispute with a sect called the Heavenly Robe sect and was injured by them. Even if he wanted to participate in the war, the Immortal Palace wouldn't agree. So the next day, eldest brother took second brother's place and came to the human world to participate in the war against the Demon Lord of 10,000 Swords. So you are the descendant of the Grand Palace Lord who founded the Mythical Fire Palace. Nongzhu sighed and said, I have heard of the Tianyi sect who injured second brother in the illusionary Immortal City, but they were eradicated by the Mythical Fire Palace a long time ago. That war seems to have caused quite a big impact in the immortal world. Even now, people are still talking about it. It seems that the Tianyi sect suffered because they had a feud with the leader of the Mythical Fire Palace. No wonder. On the other hand, Yu Qianchou frowned and muttered, He was injured on the day before we set off. What a coincidence. He had always been a suspicious person. Whenever he encountered something like this, he would be suspicious. To put it nicely, he was far-sighted and prepared for a rainy day. To put it bluntly, he was gauging the heart of a gentleman with the yardstick of a villain. Nongzhu was not good at quarreling when it came to serious matters. Otherwise, he would not have been chosen as the successor of the previous two punishment masters of the Demon Ghost region. Hearing what Yu Qianchou said, he suddenly raised his eyebrows and squinted at the ancestor of Nanming, saying, Old Man Nanming, there may be some hidden story behind this. The timing is too coincidental. Most importantly, think about what time it was. That was when the Myriad Swords Demon Monarch was wreaking havoc in both the Immortal and Netherworld. At that time, the various sects would have restrained themselves. It's not right for something like this to happen at this time. The ancestor of Nanming looked at the two of them and nodded, saying, You're right. There is indeed a hidden story behind this. Boss came to the human world and participated in several encirclements against the Myriad Swords Demon Monarch. Luckily he did not die. In one fierce battle he saved a deacon of the Heavenly Robe sect. In fact, he did not mean to save him, but at that stage, everyone had no way out and could only unite to fight against the enemy. When they could help each other, they would help each other. However, the deacon was seriously injured and could not be saved. Before he died, out of gratitude to Boss, he revealed a secret. It turned out that there was another hidden story behind the conflict between the second brother and the Heavenly Robe sect. In order not to take the risk of participating in this battle, he conspired with some people in the Heavenly Robe sect to put on a show and finally persuaded Boss to participate in the battle. Plus, that deacon of the Heavenly Robe sect was one of the people involved in the show. Nongzhu sighed and shook her head, saying, "Alas. Boss must be heartbroken after knowing this. It must not feel good to be schemed against by one's own brother. I just don't understand that second brother. Since Boss had already said that he would participate in the battle, why did he have to fight endlessly with Boss? Isn't this an unnecessary move?" His boss was very sad. In the beginning he did not believe it, but he knew that the words of a dying man are kind. There was no need for that deacon of the Heavenly Robe sect to lie to him before he died. Later on, when he thought about second brother's previous actions, there were indeed some loopholes. It was just that he trusted his brother too much and did not suspect anything. Elder ancestor Nanming sighed. "You are the same kind of person as second brother. What do you think of this?" Nongzhu asked Yu Qianchou. "You are the same kind of person as second brother." Yu Qianchou immediately retorted, but then he frowned and said, "When it comes to things like history, the general framework shouldn't be wrong, but the minor details can't be completely trusted. You can't just blindly follow what everyone says. I'm afraid only the people involved know what exactly happened best." "Oh." Nongzhu's eyes lit up and she said, "Did you see something? Why don't you say it and let us hear your wise opinion?" Elder ancestor Nanming looked over, also wanting to hear what wise opinion Yu Qianchou had. "It's not a wise opinion, but Senior Nanming, please don't be angry when I say it. It's just my guess." Yu Qianchou smiled. Elder ancestor Nanming smiled and said, "It's something that happened 100,000 years ago. Is there a need for me to be angry? Just say it, I'm all ears." Yu Qianchou nodded and organized his thoughts. Then he said, "Not everything that comes out of a person's mouth is the truth, even though that boss is your ancestor. Naturally, I'm not saying that your ancestor is lying. It's just that this matter has already passed for 100,000 years. We have no way to verify the truth unless the Lifefire Palace leader, Huajun, is willing to announce the truth. But that's impossible. However, I don't think that the words that Huolai left behind for your descendants are true. I reckon that not many ancestors would purposely leave their ugly side for their descendants to admire." "You don't have to talk about the big theory," Nongzhu urged, "just tell me directly what's wrong with Huolai's words." Purple bamboo leaves swirled and floated down from time to time in the bamboo jade paradise. The two women in the courtyard stared at the three men talking loudly. The three men's expressions and actions were sometimes arguing fiercely, sometimes frowning, and sometimes beaming with joy. Although the two women couldn't hear what they were saying, they could more or less feel the unique charm of the men when they were talking about serious matters. Men in such situations were often more attractive to women. However, most of the time the two women's gazes were focused on Yu Qianchou. At this time, Yu Qianchou's status and cultivation were much higher than the other two. The aura that unconsciously leaked out from his words and actions was obviously a notch higher than the other two. One had to admit that it was easy to attract the women's attention. That's the problem. As you said before, since the big brother has already said that he wants to participate in the war, then why does the second brother have to fight endlessly? It is indeed an unnecessary move. Yu Qianchou's gaze suddenly became deep. He narrowed his eyes and said, "But the crux of the problem is, if the big brother really wants to participate in the war and the second brother really doesn't want to risk coming to the human world to participate in the war, I can't think of any reason for the second brother to deliberately beat around the bush. He just needs to decline slightly. If the big brother really wants to leave for the sake of his younger brother, the second brother can easily stay. I'm just afraid that the truth is that the big brother is the one pretending to decline." Nongzhu slowly nodded and said, "That makes sense. I think I understand what you mean." Ancestor Nanming fell into deep thought. Yu Qianchou glanced at the two of them and continued, "You must know that the second brother colluded with the people of Tianyi sect to plot against the big brother. He took a great risk. Once the people of Tianyi sect threaten the second brother afterwards, the consequences can be imagined. In fact, it is impossible for the people of Tianyi sect to help for nothing. After that, they will definitely use this to threaten the mythical fire palace to obtain their own benefits. I'm afraid that the reason why the Tianyi sect was finally eliminated by the mythical fire palace must have something to do with this." It is highly likely that the second brother wants to silence the second brother. Yu Qianqiu finally asked, think about it again. If the big brother really wanted to participate in the war, why would the second brother pay such a great price and take such a great risk? Then the truth is very likely that after the mythical fire palace received the decree from the Immortal Palace, one of the two brothers had to participate in the war. But the two brothers were actually not willing to take the risk because at that time, the myriad swords demon monarch's limelight was too strong. With the strength of one person he could fight against the huge forces of the Immortal and Netherworld alone. He was completely invincible in the three realms. How many people would not be afraid of him? Nongzhu nodded and said, in other words, the two brothers actually did not want to participate in the war, so they pretended to decline. And the second brother was a little more scheming. Although he pretended to decline, he pretended to be serious and insisted on going. Because he was too decisive, even the big brother did not see through it. But it was to the big brother's liking, so the big brother pretended to agree reluctantly. Little did he know that the second brother was far-sighted. In order to save his life, he played a dirty trick at the critical moment. The big brother was fooled just like that. He did not even know that he was betrayed by his own brother. Instead, he shed tears of gratitude and went to participate in the war. Who knew that after that he accidentally found out the truth in the human world? I guess he was almost mad at that time. Who knows how he made up his second brother in his last words? After the analysis, he turned to old ancestor Nanming and asked, Old man Nanming, did your big brother's ancestor's last words scold the second brother to be worse than a pig or a dog? Old ancestor Nanming was speechless. Although he did not know whether the analysis of the two fellows was right or wrong, it was indeed very possible. And the ancestor's last words were indeed as Nongzhu said, scolding the current mythical fire palace's sect leader Huojun to be worse than a pig or a dog, and was very shameless. Seeing that old ancestor Nanming's face did not look too good, Yu Qianqiu kindly comforted him, Senior Nanming, actually, you may not be happy to hear this. Although the second brother is unscrupulous, it is obvious that his strategy is better than the big brother's. The current mythical fire palace's sect leader Huojun's cultivation has reached the intermediate immortal emperor stage. He is one of the top experts in the immortal world. The mythical fire palace can stand tall in the immortal world where thousands of sects fight against each other, and its strength can even be ranked at the top, all thanks to sect leader Huojun's contributions. To put it bluntly, if the mythical fire palace was controlled by the big brother, it might not be where it is today. Maybe it would have collapsed long ago. 100,000 years. That is not a small amount of time. There are countless sects in the immortal world that have declined and been annihilated. The reason why the mythical fire palace can stand tall until now and become one of the top ancient sects in the immortal world is worth pondering. So your ancestors' loss was not unjust. Chapter 944. Yes. Nongzhu nodded and said, second brother is really good. Not only did he retreat before advancing, but he also played a trick to confuse big brother. He even cried and shouted to go with us. Big brother is really touched by this brotherly love. Unfortunately, there was an accident. The eldest brother didn't expect that it was his beloved younger brother who was playing dirty. Therefore, the eldest brother was willing to die without any complaints. If the eldest brother didn't happen to know the truth, perhaps he would still remember the brotherly relationship until the day he died. Second brother is really powerful. No wonder mythical fire palace can survive for so long. I say, old man Nanming, don't be angry anymore. After all, if you count your ancestors' generation, you and the current mythical fire palace sect leader Huojun are the same ancestor. The matter has already passed for so long, let the past be in the past. Did I say what I'm complaining about? The Nanming ancestor didn't know whether to laugh or cry. He didn't know why these two fellows were consoling him here. He immediately rolled his eyes and said, I say, have the two of you already made friends with the people of the Lifefire Palace in the immortal world? If not, why are you guys speaking up for the Lifefire Palace? Yu Qianqiu and Nongzhu were speechless at the same time. Ancestor Nanming hit the nail on the head. Yu Qianqiu really did become friends with the mythical fire palace, although it was a false friendship. Nongzhu hurriedly said, Old Nanming, from what you said before, did your ancestor pass down the craftsmanship of refining treasures from the mythical fire palace? Yu Qianqiu immediately thought of this and his eyes lit up. Ancestor Nanming paused and said after a moment of silence, yes. It was indeed passed down. Originally, My ancestor was lucky enough to survive until the last battle against the demon monarch of Thousand Swords in the immortal world and the underworld. He could have returned to the immortal world to settle the score with second brother. Who knew that at this time the sky would change and countless golden thunderbolts that had never been seen before fell from the sky? Golden thunderbolts? Really? Nongzhu was stunned. Yu Qianqiu was not surprised because he had heard from Bai Chongqun that there were indeed countless golden thunderbolts cleansing the human world. As for what happened, he did not know. It shouldn't be fake. Grandmaster Nanming recalled and said, "My ancestor's last words said that the power of that golden thunderbolt was very strong. It almost killed all the experts of the immortal realm and the netherworld who were wandering in the mortal world. Even the emperor of the immortal realm and the emperor of the underworld couldn't escape. Luckily, the cultivation of those two was indeed strong. However, it still scared the two supreme martial artists of the immortal realm and the netherworld so much that they fled in panic. My ancestor was lucky. Although he wasn't directly struck by the golden thunderbolt, he was still implicated by the aftershock. He was an early-stage immortal emperor expert and he became immortal." Yu Qianqiu and Nongzhu looked at each other. Even the immortal emperor and the emperor of the underworld had to flee. Therefore, the power of the golden thunderbolt was unimaginably terrifying. Nongzhu asked in confusion. No matter what, he was an early-stage immortal emperor expert. Even if his cultivation was destroyed, he shouldn't have degenerated into a mortal with the strength of his body. Grandmaster Nanming shook his head and said, "I don't know why my ancestor was beaten into a mortal. In the end, we can only blame it on the wrath of heaven." Yu Qianqiu was thoughtful when he heard this. He used thunder and lightning to forge his immortal body. Maybe the golden thunderbolt could really beat an immortal cultivator into a mortal. Not only was he beaten into a mortal, but his dantian was also destroyed. Grandmaster Nanming sighed and said, "In this way, the possibility of my ancestor returning to the immortal realm was completely cut off. Think about it, how long can a person live after becoming immortal? The limit of his lifespan became the biggest problem. My ancestor felt that death was approaching step by step, but he was still unwilling. He married a wife and had children in the mortal world. Before he died, he left a will for his descendants, hoping that one of them would return to the immortal realm to help him take revenge and regain the power of the mythical fire palace. However, his descendants were only mediocre mortals. They didn't have the aptitude to cultivate. Fortunately, after experiencing all kinds of calamities for 100,000 years, the inheritance didn't break until I was born. However, the path of immortal ascension is long and difficult. Moreover, there's no need for me, a descendant, to continue the hatred from 100,000 years ago." Yu Qianqiu and Nongzhu sighed. They didn't expect a dignified early-stage immortal emperor expert to end up like this. They couldn't help but sigh at how unfortunate his fate was. Since Grandmaster Nanming has the refining skills of the mythical fire palace, it seems that there's no need to go to the God Ruin realm to steal the craftsmanship of the Ape King. Nongzhu glanced at Yu Qianqiu and said, "Maybe I'm ignorant." Yu Qianqiu pondered for a moment and said, "But I think the craftsmanship of the Ape King is indeed extraordinary. Senior Nanming, why don't you take a trip with me? If it's really not worth mentioning, we'll come back." "All right. I'll go with you to take a look." Grandmaster Nanming's tone was filled with pride. Yu Qianqiu immediately smiled and removed the soundproof enchantment. He walked straight to Furong, who was looking forward to seeing him. He held Furong's hand and said, "I'm leaving again." Furong just nodded and said, "I'll wait for you to come back. I'll come and pick you up as soon as possible." Yu Qianqiu looked around after letting go of her hand. There was a hint of doubt in his expression. Furong smiled and said, "Sister Yen and the others are cultivating in seclusion in the backyard. They're preparing to help you in the future. Let's go and see them." Yu Qianqiu immediately released his divine sense to scan the backyard. He saw that Yen Yu and the Enchantress of 100 Charms were sitting cross-legged in a row of quiet bamboo houses in the backyard, concentrating on cultivating. Seeing that the two of them were fine, he shook his head and said, "I won't disturb them for now." Furong obediently agreed. Yu Qianqiu then took out a flying shuttle and flew into the sky. He turned and raised his hand to Grandmaster Nanming and said, "Senior Nanming, follow me to the East Holy Land first." Grandmaster Nanming nodded and leaped onto the flying shuttle. Speaking of the East Holy Land, Nongzhu seemed to have thought of something. She asked in a flash, Why are you gathering all the cultivators who know how to refine pills to the East Holy Land? You'll know in the future. Yu Qianqiu cupped his hands and bid farewell. Ze, who had been ignored for a long time, suddenly shouted, "Big liar, where are you going? Take me to play with you." "Play with me on the bed? Are you coming?" Yu Qianqiu rolled his eyes and ignored her. He teleported onto the flying shuttle and drove it away like a stream of light. Ze was so angry that she stomped her feet and cursed him for being a big liar. Nongzhu stared at Ze in a daze. She had 1,000 thoughts in her mind, but she didn't know what to say. She only felt bitterness in her mouth, and her whole body was filled with powerlessness. The current Yu Qianqiu was no longer the same as before. Nongzhu was completely powerless to control him. Although Ze liked him, she didn't know how to please a man. Yu Qianqiu was also someone who could be persuaded by reason but not cowed by force. How was he supposed to fulfill his daughter's happiness? On the flying shuttle, Grandmaster Nanming was secretly speechless at Yu Qianqiu's cultivation. He felt that the speed at which Yu Qianqiu drove the flying shuttle seemed to be faster than a cultivator at the last stage of the soul formation realm. It was no wonder that he wanted to use the flying shuttle to carry him. Little did he know that if it wasn't for the fact that Yu Qianqiu didn't want to expose his ability to teleport between realms to too many people, he would have brought him to the Divine Ruin realm long ago. There was no need for him to come to the Eastern Holy Land. This was the first time Grandmaster Nanming visited the underground palace left behind by the cultivators of the Netherworld. After learning that it was a teleportation formation, he didn't even have time to look at it in detail before the scene in front of him changed. He was in a dark and dense forest that covered the sky. Stepping on the thick rotten leaves, Grandmaster Nanming looked around at the unknown ancient trees around him and asked in shock, "This is the Divine Ruin realm?" "Yes." "Follow me." Yu Qianqiu called out and dashed out of the forest. Grandmaster Nanming followed. Yu Qianqiu waved his arm and pointed at the maroon mountain in the distance that was emitting black smoke. "That is the great flaming mountain where the Ape King lives. It is indeed a good place to refine things," Grandmaster Nanming judged with the eyes of an expert. After Yu Qianqiu told him some things to take note of and avoid, the two of them dashed forward together. In a short while they arrived in front of the cave at the mountainside of the Great Flaming Mountain. When someone barged in, the great strength fire apes in the various caves on the mountain immediately roared and roared. When they saw that it was Yu Qianqiu, they quieted down. It was Grandmaster Nanming's first time seeing the great strength fire apes, so he naturally couldn't help but take a few more glances. Yu Qianqiu was just about to call out to the Ape King when it was alarmed by the commotion outside the cave. "Brother Yu is finally here," the Ape King said with a laugh. When it saw Grandmaster Nanming, it guessed that he should be the person that Yu Qianqiu mentioned. It couldn't help but size him up carefully. When it realized that he only had the cultivation of middle-stage deity transformation, it couldn't help but look a little doubtful. It wondered if this person was really an expert in this field. After Yu Qianqiu introduced the two of them, Grandmaster Nanming felt a little apprehensive. After all, it was his first time seeing a great immortal realm cultivator. His gaze lingered on the metal vest on the Ape King's body. It was probably the one that Yu Qianqiu mentioned. The Ape King then waved its hand toward the cave and said, "Please come in. Let me see Mr. Nanming's refining skills." Hehe. Yu Qianqiu smiled and said politely, "We are guests, so how can we usurp the host's position? Brother Ape, you should let us see your superb skills first." He had made up his mind. If Grandmaster Nanming liked the Ape King's skills, then he would talk about it. If not, then he would not waste time and send Grandmaster Nanming back as soon as possible. "Alright." The Ape King waved its hand straightforwardly. "Please come in." It led the two of them into the cave. The cave was spacious enough to accommodate 7 to 8 people walking side by side at the same time. Waves of heat surged out from the inside. After walking for a short distance, there was a stone staircase that slowly led downwards. The three of them quickly arrived at the belly of the empty mountain that was emitting red light. There were many giant strength fire apes moving about inside. Looking up, the great flaming mountain was hollow. It was like looking at the sky from the bottom of a well. They could see the blue sky and white clouds above. The Ape King looked at the two of them who were looking around. Suddenly, it let out a roar that reverberated in the empty mountain. Immediately, as if it had issued a command, many running footsteps could be heard from the small caves around them. 2 giant strength fire apes carried the big spider's corpse out. Chapter 945. Hee hee. The caverns of all sizes around the empty mountainside were suddenly filled with uniform chants that sounded like the pulling of a rope. Then the sound of drums rose and fell continuously. On the rocky ground in the center of the mountainside that was emitting red light, countless red flames shot out from the cracks of the rocks as if something was blowing them out from the ground. As the flames rose higher and higher, the red flames gradually turned from red to green and white like a sharp glint. Xianxia and ancestor Nanming were both curious. They released their divine senses to investigate the surrounding caverns of all sizes. They saw that below those caverns, there were large iron boxes embedded in the stone walls. The airflow was rushing and a group of giant strength fire apes were pushing and pulling a huge piston rod in front of the iron box. It was actually a bellow. There was naturally more than one bellow like this. There was one bellow in all the caverns of all sizes. Xianxia and ancestor Nanming looked at each other. The former immediately transmitted his voice to the latter. Do you guys also do this when you forge? The latter paused and replied, this is the most primitive method. Are you sure that his forging skills are really unique? The former was speechless for a moment before replying, let's wait a little longer. Maybe he has found another way to do it. The two then saw the two giant strength fire apes carrying the huge spider's corpse suddenly throw something into the green and white blazing fire formation that was 100 meters in radius. Bang! Rubble flew everywhere with sparks. The sound of drums did not stop. It was obvious that the fire apes had been pushing and pulling with all their might. The three of them stared at the huge spider's corpse that was burning in the flames for a long time, but they did not see any change in the huge spider's corpse. The Ape King had his hands behind his back and his legs slightly spread apart. He stood there with a righteous and awe-inspiring air, appearing to be very patient. Xianxia and ancestor Nanming thought that he was going to do something shocking, but after waiting for a long time, they gradually realized that something was wrong. Could it be that, cough cough? Xianxia coughed and asked, Brother Ape, didn't you want to show us your forging skills? What are you waiting for? The Ape King turned around and looked at him as if he was an amateur. He waved his hand and pointed at the huge spider's corpse in the flames. Naturally, I am waiting for the fire force to clear before I forge. Grandmaster Nanming's cultivation base was the lowest among them. Originally, he had been waiting patiently even if he was impatient. However, when he heard the Ape King's words, he could not help but turn around and cry out in surprise together with Xianxia. Is there a problem? The Ape King was puzzled. Grandmaster Nanming could not help but ask, are you going to keep waiting like this? The Ape King immediately snorted coldly and said, do you have a better idea? That. Xianxia swallowed hard and interrupted, don't worry, Brother Ape. What he meant was, how long will it take for the fire force to be fully activated? The Ape King looked at the burning flames with a serious expression and said, the shell of the temple rainbow spider is extraordinarily hard. It will take at least 10 days and 10 nights for the fire to penetrate it. 10 days and 10 nights? Xianxia cried out in surprise again. This time he did not plan to give face to the Ape King. He did not have so much time to play with him slowly. He turned and asked Grandmaster Nanming, do you have any way to make it faster? In reality, he could easily solve this problem himself. However, he was not too familiar with the situation in the Divine Ruin realm. It was not convenient for him to take out the blue and purple flames to show off. It's very simple. Most master refiners will use some external objects to raise the temperature of the fire, such as using kerosene and the like. Grandmaster Nanming glanced at the Ape King as if he was worried that he would be unhappy. When he saw that the Ape King was also listening attentively, he felt relieved and continued. However, true master refiners are more or less proficient in the arrangement of formations. This is because a good artifact has the existence of formations integrated into it. Whether a treasure is good or not, other than the key factor of raw materials, the fusion of the formation and the treasure is also very important. We usually see all kinds of miraculous effects from treasures, and this is all because of the formation. Because they are proficient in formations, most of them will set up a fire-gathering formation at the place of refinement to condense the strongest fire temperature to speed up the smelting of the artifact. Xianxia nodded slightly and looked at the Ape King with a disdainful expression. He thought to himself, old monkey, look at him. This is a true master refiner. Just the theoretical knowledge that he talks about is already set after set. It's hard to not be convinced. Unlike you who is still using such a primitive method. Formation. The Ape King was stunned. Back then he had only unintentionally seen an ordinary cultivator forging things. What he saw was similar to an ordinary blacksmith forging iron. There was no way he could be compared to a blacksmith who was an expert in blacksmithing like the Nanming ancestor. In the endless months that followed, he had been fumbling around by himself. He had never come into contact with a master refiner like the Grandmaster Nanming, so it was not strange that he did not know. Brother Ape, why don't you let Mr. Nanming help you set up a fire-gathering formation? Xianxia pointed at the place where the flames were blazing. The Ape King came back to his senses and immediately cupped his hands at the Grandmaster Nanming. Please enlighten me, Mr. Nanming. He revealed a hint of modesty now, but he still wore an expectant look on his face. It was as if he was waiting to see if Mr. Nanming was good at talking or doing well. The Grandmaster Nanming did not stand on ceremony. He took out a handful of spirit stones from his storage pouch and threw them into the stone walls around the flames. One handful was not enough, so he took out dozens of top-grade spirit stones in succession. Only then was he able to set up a complicated formation in the belly of the mountain. After setting up the formation, he pinched his fingers and cast several spells into the formation. The fire-gathering formation was immediately activated. In an instant, the airflow in the belly of the mountain surged and condensed violently. The Ape King and Xianxia could only feel the rolling heat waves in the belly of the mountain diminishing rapidly. They were suddenly swallowed back to the center of the mountain where the heat was spreading. The greenish-white flames that emerged from the cracks of the crushed stones on the ground looked as if they had encountered a tornado. The flames that rose high up in the sky began to swirl and gather toward the giant spider's corpse that was burning in the center. The Grandmaster Nanming then cast several spells to adjust the formation. The greenish-white flames that were sweeping toward them were like flowing clouds, wrapping around the giant spider's corpse and burning it to its heart's content. The effect of the gathering and burning was probably dozens or even hundreds of times stronger than before. The scene was very magical. In fact, this was also the first time Xianxia had seen a master refiner in action. He could not help but click his tongue in wonder. The Ape King's expression was somewhat sluggish. After being dumbfounded for a while, it turned to look at the Grandmaster Nanming with a gaze filled with fanaticism. Half a day later, the giant spider's corpse began to emit waves of a disgusting stench. It was obvious that the high temperature of the rolling flames had destroyed its internal organs. It was estimated that all of its internal organs would be burnt to ashes soon. Then a slightly red carapace gradually appeared in the greenish-white flames. When it turned completely red, the Grandmaster Nanming cast another spell into the formation. In an instant, it turned into a ball of burning flames that quickly spread out to its original state. The high temperature also quickly filled the entire belly of the mountain. The fire force has been penetrated. Ape King, you can begin now, the Grandmaster Nanming said with a confident smile. However, after the Ape King had seen the Grandmaster Nanming's methods, he did not seem so confident anymore. He cupped his hands in a humble manner and said, Mr. Nanming is an expert in this field. There is no need for me to embarrass myself anymore. As he said this, he waved his arm and pointed at the red carapace. He said politely, Please give me some pointers, Mr. Nanming. The Grandmaster Nanming looked at Xianxia to seek his opinion. Xianxia immediately coughed and interrupted, Brother Ape, since you want Mr. Nanming to give you pointers, you should at least let Mr. Nanming take a look at your abilities first. Otherwise, how can he teach you? Brother Ape, why don't you display your refining methods to your heart's content and let Mr. Nanming take a look first? Alright. The Ape King was a straightforward person. After he cupped his hands in greeting at the Grandmaster Nanming, he took a step forward and a majestic aura suddenly erupted from his body. The bones in his body made explosive sounds and he seemed to have grown taller in an instant. His fiery red hair moved without any wind and the muscles that were exposed outside the metal vest swelled. The muscles on his arms were like steel wires that were twisted together, protruding and wriggling. One look and one could tell that he was filled with explosive power. Hi! The Ape King's right arm suddenly struck forward and a huge shadow of an illusory palm grabbed the red carapace. After that, he twisted his body and waved his arm at an incredible speed, throwing the red carapace behind him. With a dang, it landed steadily on the dark platform behind him. Then the Ape King suddenly spread out his arms. Wung, Red flames instantly erupted from his body and enveloped his entire body. Under the astonished gaze of the Grandmaster Nanming, the Ape King charged towards the red carapace like a cannonball while carrying raging flames. He took advantage of the momentum and struck out a huge shadow of his fist at lightning speed, smashing it on the red carapace. Dang! Bright sparks flew everywhere. The first punch was followed by thousands of punches. Deafening dang sounds that were as dense as raindrops rang violently in the belly of the mountain, and bright sparks flew everywhere. In just a few breaths' time, countless figures that carried raging flames appeared around the red and transparent carapace. Tens of thousands of fiery fists struck out like a storm, and all of them landed heavily on the bright red carapace of the spider. It couldn't be, right? Yu Qianqiu and the Grandmaster Nanming looked at this scene in a daze. Fiery fists surrounded the red carapace hammer in front of their eyes. Never in their dreams would they have thought that the Ape King would use his fists as hammers to hammer things. What was the difference between this and forging iron? Senior Nanming, with your eyesight, can you tell what he's doing? Yu Qianqiu transmitted his voice to the Grandmaster Nanming. It should be the most primitive forging method. But I can't be sure. Let's wait and see. After the Grandmaster Nanming replied, his pupils suddenly shrank and he stared at the dark platform that was enduring the forging. With the Ape King's cultivation, the countless heavy punches that he had unleashed could even cause a mountain to collapse. However, the black platform's endurance was so strong that it was unbelievable. No matter how many punches were thrown at it, it would not budge. After another half a day, the bright red carapace of the spider finally began to shrink bit by bit under the bombardment of countless heavy punches. Chapter 946. The strange thing was that after such a long time, the red color of the carapace should have gradually dimmed due to the heat dissipating. However, the spider's carapace didn't seem to be affected by the Ape King's concentrated attacks. Even after half a day had passed, it still maintained its bright red heat. Yu Qianqiu understood the reason after pondering for a while. It was probably related to the Ape King's blazing fists and the raging flames that surged out of its body. The Ape King moved quickly with flames all over its body. It was as if it was using fire to wrap around the spider's carapace to prevent it from cooling down. In addition to the violent and concentrated blazing fists, even a piece of dark steel would be scorched by it. What a one-track mind. As Yu Qianqiu sighed, he glanced at elder ancestor Nanming and immediately realized that something was wrong. He followed the elder's gaze and also noticed that there was something strange about the pitch-black platform. He transmitted his voice and asked, "Elder Nanming, is the platform that withstood the tempering a treasure?" "I can't tell what it is either, but it must be a treasure to be able to withstand such heavy attacks," elder ancestor Nanming said with certainty. 3 days passed by just like that. The spider's carapace had long changed beyond recognition. Its huge body that was about 10 meters long had become a 2-meter square metal block. Even so, the Ape King continued to swing its blazing fists. Not only did its momentum not weaken, the sounds became even more intense. Of course, this was related to the shrinking of its body and the shrinking of its range of movement. This way, the intensity of the attacks on the metal block became even more concentrated. When the 6th day passed, the 2-meter square metal block became less than a meter. Yu Qianqiu went from being dumbfounded to feeling numb. He couldn't help but admire the Ape King's profound cultivation. This was 6 consecutive days of intense consumption. Yu Qianqiu naturally didn't have the patience and time to stay here and slowly waste his time. Every day he would go out to deal with his own matters and check out the surrounding terrain. However, elder ancestor Nanming's gaze gradually became fiery. He seemed to have understood something. He stared at the gradually shrinking metal block day after day without blinking. When Yu Qianqiu returned from his routine trip, he saw that the Ape King was still swinging its fists like rain. He cursed the Ape King in his heart for not being afraid of dying from exhaustion. After waiting for a while, he felt like he was about to doze off again. When he saw that Grandmaster Nanming was full of energy, he sent him a voice transmission out of boredom. "Senior Nanming, is there any meaning to this fellow's actions?" "Yes, of course there is." Grandmaster Nanming was a little excited as he transmitted his voice and exclaimed, "So that's how it is. Who would have thought that a stupid method would have its own benefits?" Fortunately, he was gifted. If it was someone else, no matter how high their cultivation was, it would be difficult for them to continuously temper themselves and return to their original state. Every time he punches, Some of the impurities in the metal will be expelled. If this continues, all the impurities in the metal will be expelled until it can no longer shrink. At that time, what will be left will be the essence of the metal. I see. What are the benefits? Xianxia asked. He pondered that if the effect was really great, his gold incantation should be able to display its usefulness in this aspect. It would be much better than the Ape King's stupid method. Grandmaster Nanming explained excitedly, "You must know that the purer the quality of the material, the stronger its extensibility and capacity. For example, a piece of pig iron, if it hasn't been tempered to remove its impurities, its extensibility will definitely be very poor and it will break easily. However, after being tempered to remove its impurities, you will be able to bend it, but it won't break easily. This is extensibility. In other words, it can contain more formations and the treasures refined will also be of higher quality. This is a great benefit to the refiner. Moreover, this material is the shell of the Rainbow Temple spider, which is already abnormally hard." His explanation immediately piqued Xianxia's interest. He couldn't help but look forward to the Ape King's early completion. In the end, they waited for the 10th day. As the storm-like fiery fists gradually died down, the flames on the Ape King's body also disappeared. Finally, it stopped while sweating profusely and panting. With a pale face, it walked down with a palm-sized piece of metal that was still fiery red. However, its body was a little shaky. It was obvious that it had used up a lot of its cultivation. This big spider's body contains a lot of armor essence. In the past, I hunted 1,000 ordinary Rainbow Temple spiders, but the amount of armor essence in one of its bodies was not even as much. Mr. Nanming, what do you think? The Ape King said while panting. Xianxia's gaze was filled with admiration as he looked at the Ape King. At this moment, the consumption of his cultivation was probably 80 to 90% of his prime. If he encountered someone with ulterior motives, it could be said to be the most dangerous moment. However, it had no distractions towards the two of them. It was a sincere and magnanimous person worth associating with. Not bad, not bad. Such a good thing can be said to be perfect. Can definitely be used to refine a top-notch treasure. The Nanming patriarch exclaimed in admiration as he held the piece of metal that was gradually cooling. However, he then said with some regret, "It's a pity that there's too little. Otherwise, I would exhaust all my abilities to display my expertise in this and see what kind of good treasure I can refine. There's more here." The Ape King shouted hurriedly. Then it eagerly took off the vest and boots on its feet and offered them with both hands. "As long as Mr. is willing to teach me how to refine treasures, I am willing to give all of these to you." The Nanming patriarch was stunned. He took the items in the Ape King's hands and compared them. Only then did he realize that they were made of the same material as the piece of metal. In his excitement, he glanced at Xianxia. He seemed to be a little hesitant. Xianxia chuckled and said, "Brother Ape, the art of refining treasures is Mr. Nanming's specialty. He usually won't teach it to outsiders. If you acknowledge him as your master, then it'll be a different story." As he spoke, he even gave the Ape King a look. The Ape King was stunned, but he immediately reacted. He knelt down at the Nanming patriarch and bowed. Disciple Yuan Hong pays respect to master. The Nanming patriarch's expression froze. He transmitted his voice to Xianxia. "This is too childish. His cultivation base is much higher than mine. How can I be his master? You're being pedantic. There's no seniority in learning. The one who's accomplished comes first. Besides, he's not asking you to teach him cultivation. He's learning your skills in refining treasures. In this aspect, you're good enough to be his master." Xianxia transmitted his voice. "Besides, there's only benefits to you if you can take in a disciple with such a high cultivation base. At the same time, it'll also be beneficial to my future arrangements. Just take it as giving me face and take him in. As for how much you should teach him, it's up to you. No one can force you to do this, right?" He had his own plans. He had brought the army of Utopia to the Divine Ruin Realm for two reasons. Firstly, he was prepared to use the ferocious beasts in the Divine Ruin Realm to train them. Secondly, he wanted the army to use the training opportunity to collect the inner cores of the ferocious beasts so as to help Bai Suzhen master the 10,000 Demon Heart Sutra as soon as possible. However, this area was the Ape King's territory. It would be beneficial for the army of Utopia to have a good relationship with the Ape King. It would be even better if they could take care of him. Just as he was pondering how he could forge a good relationship with the Ape King, the Nanming Patriarch's appearance solved the problem. The Nanming Patriarch pondered for a while before freeing one of his hands to help the kneeling Ape King up. "Since that's the case, I'll take you in. Get up." "Thank you, Master." The Ape King cupped his hands in excitement and stood up. He could not suppress the agitation on his face. Xianxia looked at him and shook his head with a bitter smile. He felt envious and speechless toward this kind of person who was obsessed with something simple and pure. Then he stretched out his hand and took the Ape King's smelly boots from the Nanming Patriarch's hands. He then took out the big spider's jaws. He held one item in each hand and closed his eyes to sense them carefully. The Nanming Patriarch and the Ape King looked at him in confusion. They did not know what he was going to do. "I see. I understand now." After Xianxia felt the difference in the structure of the items in his hands, he opened his eyes and threw the smelly boots in his right hand back to the Nanming Patriarch. Then he activated the Nanming art. The dust from the spider's jaws danced in the air and gradually became smaller. Soon, a small light golden metal ball appeared in his hand. The Ape King was secretly shocked. He naturally knew how hard the jaws were. They were the hardest part of a spider's body and also the part that contained the densest amount of armor essence. However, he did not expect that they would be turned into ashes in the blink of an eye in Xianxia's hands. It was too terrifying. He did not know how high this person's cultivation was. That was not all. Xianxia took out the 8 spider legs one by one and performed the same Nanming art. In a short while, a total of 9 metal balls appeared in his hands. Xianxia held them in one palm and extended them in front of the Nanming Patriarch and the Ape King. He asked with a smile, "Master and disciple, take a look. Is this the same thing that Ape Yuanhong refined?" The master and disciple picked up a metal ball suspiciously and examined it. After looking at it, both of them were shocked. The Ape King's face became even paler. He had used his proudest and most capable ability to refine something that he had spent many days to refine, but in the hands of this person he could do it in just a snap of his fingers. The difference was too big. The Nanming Patriarch was flabbergasted. "How did you do it?" Xianxia did not think much of it and stuffed the 9 metal balls into the Nanming Patriarch's arms. He said with a smile, "I'll give this to you. Even though it's a little lacking, it shouldn't be a problem to refine this little guy, right? Do me a favor. When you're free, help me refine a good treasure." As he said this, he pointed at the dark platform and asked the Ape King, "Yuanhong, what is this? Why does it feel even harder than the Temple Rainbow Spider's armor essence?" The Nanming Patriarch looked over. This was actually a question he wanted to ask as well. The Ape King shook his head. "It is indeed harder than the Temple Rainbow Spider's armor essence, but I don't know what it is. Its original form is a huge meteorite that flew from the heavens and landed nearby. I saw that it contained quite a lot of metal, so I broke the meteorite apart and brought it back in batches to be smelted. I used the same refining method as before and used 50,000 years on and off. In the end it ended up like this." Chapter 947. Xianxia walked to the black platform that was 3 to 4 meters thick, 100 meters long and 40 to 50 meters wide to take a look. He could not help but sigh inwardly. This old monkey was really persistent. He had actually spent almost 50,000 years to refine this huge metal plate. It really left him speechless. He then turned his head back and asked curiously, "Yuanhong, since it's harder than the Rainbow Temple Spider's armor essence, why don't you use it to refine the armor you're wearing?" "I'm really ashamed." The Ape King cupped his hands at the Nanming Patriarch and explained, "It's not that I don't want to, it's because this thing is too hard. My clumsy method of forging a huge piece of metal is still passable, but it's too difficult to forge it into a well-connected armor. It's so difficult that I had no choice but to give up. It just so happens that the thing I'm forging lacks a sturdy base, so I made do with it. But now that Master is here, I'm sure Master will have a way to solve this." He then pointed at the crushed stones that were emitting the red light of the earth fire on the ground at the center of the mountain and said, "These crushed stones are the remains of that meteorite from beyond the heavens. There's still some metal in them, but it's precisely because I have no use for them after refining them that I might as well fill the earth fire and use them as scattered anvils when refining things." Xianxia nodded slightly when he heard that. He stroked his chin and looked at the huge metal plate under his feet. His eyes lit up slightly as he asked, "Mr. Nanming, I'm sure the treasure refined from this thing won't be inferior to the Rainbow Temple Spider's armor essence, right? The Nanming Patriarch walked forward and formed a strange and special complicated hand seal. He brewed a spell and cast it into the black platform. After examining it closely for a while, he said in astonishment and excitement, "It's really good stuff. It's 10 times stronger than the Rainbow Temple Spider's armor essence. It's such a waste to use such a good thing as a base." Xianxia's eyes immediately lit up and he said, "Then how about we refine it into a treasure?" The Ape King's eyes also lit up, but when he saw the inspection spell cast by the Nanming Patriarch, his eyes lit up as well. "It's naturally good to be able to refine it into a treasure, but it's a pity." Grandmaster Nanming shook his head slightly and sighed. "It's a pity that my cultivation base is a little low, so it's hard for me to add formations to it when I'm refining it. If I'm not careful, it'll be ruined." The biggest problem was that it was just as Yuan Hong had said. Casting it was truly difficult. Even if one used a special method, it would take more than 10 years to refine a single treasure. Time is secondary, the main thing is, it's just too difficult. If your cultivation is raised to the immortal stage, can you add an array formation in here when you're refining? Xianxia asked. Patriarch Nanming was stunned. He then nodded and said, "If I can raise my cultivation to the celestial realm, it shouldn't be a big problem with my comprehension over the years. But how can it be so easy to raise my cultivation to the celestial realm?" Xianxia waved his hand and stopped arguing about this problem. He then asked, "Then if I help you cast the item you want to refine first, the time needed to refine it should be greatly reduced, right?" When he said this, the Nanming Patriarch and the Ape King's eyes lit up at the same time. They both recalled his miraculous method just now. This matter was probably not a problem for him at all. The Nanming Patriarch clapped his hands and shouted, "This is the biggest problem. If you can cast it first, it'll greatly reduce the time needed to refine it. I can guarantee that you'll be able to refine a set of treasures in 10 days. However, after his excitement, his expression darkened again. He shook his head and smiled bitterly. "But I'll say the ugly words first. With my current cultivation base, my control is not stable at all. There's still a high chance that it'll be ruined." The heavens are really on my side. Xianxia suddenly laughed maniacally when he heard this. He then cupped his hands at the Nanming Patriarch and said, "Senior Nanming, I'll solve all the problems. You just need to help me refine a batch of treasures with this item. How about it?" "Really?" As soon as the Nanming Patriarch said this, he felt that it was a little inappropriate. He looked at the Ape King and said, "Yuan Hong, this is yours. I'll have to ask for your permission first." Xianxia immediately narrowed his eyes and stared at Yuan Hong. If he dared to stop him, then don't blame him for being impolite. Disciple will listen to master's arrangements. But disciple has a request. The Ape King bowed a little nervously and said, "Disciple only asks that when master refines the treasures, disciple can be allowed to learn by the side. Even if it's to be an assistant to gain experience, it's fine." After he finished speaking, he did not dare to raise his head. Although he was now the disciple of the Nanming Patriarch, he was used to ruling over this area and being the overlord. It could be said that bad habits were hard to change. Otherwise, why would a disciple raise conditions to their master? But this was already a very big change. It would probably take some time to settle everything in one go. At the very least, he had to wait until the Nanming Patriarch revealed his methods of refining treasures and convinced him wholeheartedly. Otherwise, it was very possible that he would kill the Nanming Patriarch, his master, in a fit of unhappiness. After all, the ethics within the ruins of God could not be compared to the outside world. It was inevitable that the dignified Ape King would have some wild nature and temper. Of course, the main reason why he was nervous when he said this was because Xianxia was by his side. The key was that the methods that Xianxia had revealed were too intimidating, so he could not help but be afraid. As expected, when Xianxia heard this, he snorted coldly and said, "Yuan Hong, I've given you some face, but you still want to take advantage of me. Do you believe that I'll teach you a lesson right now? I'm warning you, if anything happens to Mr. Nanming here, I'll immediately make sure that not a single living thing can be found in this flaming mountain, starting from you." The Ape King was speechless. When this guy had just arrived, he was still acting like he was close with his brother. Why did he suddenly turn hostile now? He could not help but look at the Nanming Patriarch with a pleading look. The Nanming Patriarch immediately waved his hand at Xianxia, indicating that he should stop talking. He said to the Ape King, "Since you've acknowledged me as your master, I'll naturally teach you what I should teach you. However, I don't want to hear about this bargaining a second time. Otherwise, our relationship as master and disciple will end here. I'll forget about it this time. I'm refining treasures here, so naturally I need someone to help me. You can start learning from me." "Thank you, master." The Ape King bowed excitedly. Xianxia immediately walked over and patted his shoulder. He said with a smile, "That's right. As a disciple you should act like a disciple. Otherwise, what's the point of being a disciple? Don't you think so?" He could turn hostile and laugh whenever he wanted, but a straightforward person like the Ape King could not get used to it. He could only cup his hands awkwardly and said, "I've learned something." Actually, as long as he did not do anything out of line, Xianxia did not plan to do anything to him. He was just trying to scare him just now so that he would have some scruples in his heart. This was also to save him trouble in the future. Since the matter was over, Xianxia no longer pestered him. He immediately took out a great restriction-breaking pill, a marrow-cleansing pill and an immortal ascension pill. He pulled the Nanming Patriarch over and explained how to use them and the symptoms that would appear. Finally, he stuffed them into the Nanming Patriarch's hand. "Is this real?" The Nanming Patriarch looked at the pill in his hand in disbelief. The Ape King did not think that what Xianxia said was a lie. Instead, he became even more wary of Xianxia. "My character is famous for being good. You don't believe others, but you don't believe me? Don't worry and take it. Just deal with it according to what I say." Xianxia urged him to start quickly and not waste time. Old ancestor Nanming was both excited and skeptical. If Xianxia didn't praise his character, he would have directly consumed it. But once Xianxia praised his character, he immediately became a little timid. Others did not know, but he had been with Nongzhu for a long time. He often heard Nongzhu talk about the dirty things that Xianxia had done. The Xianxia in Nongzhu's mouth could be said to be a person who did all kinds of good and bad things. It would be strange if the Nanming Patriarch was not afraid. However, when he thought about it, Xianxia did not have the intention to harm him. With his current cultivation, if he wanted to harm him, he could do it directly. There was no need to go around in such a big circle. In addition, with Xianxia's unceasing urging, the Nanming Patriarch gritted his teeth and walked to the center of the dark platform. He sat down cross-legged and took the limit-breaking pill. The facts proved that Xianxia did not lie to him. When his cultivation successfully broke through to the final stage of soul formation with the help of the Spirit Stone, the Nanming Patriarch was immediately excited. He did not expect that he would break through the shackles that he had not broken through for so many years in one go. Of course, he had just taken a limit-breaking pill, so the toxins in his body were not heavy. Thus he did not suffer much. Otherwise, he was afraid that he would really doubt Xianxia's intentions. The Ape King saw with his own eyes that his master's cultivation broke through just like that. The shock in his heart could be imagined. The Nanming Patriarch had no more scruples now. Without the urging of Xianxia, he quickly swallowed the marrow-cleansing pill. After tossing and turning his body black, the Immortal Ascension pill was stuffed into his mouth like candy. However, he suffered a little this time. However, Xianxia had already told him in advance and he was already mentally prepared. He gritted his teeth and finally endured it. His cultivation successfully stepped into the early stage of minor immortal. "This is real. I really stepped into the immortal realm?" The Nanming Patriarch checked the changes in his body. He still could not believe it. He felt like he was dreaming. Did he really break through to the immortal realm that he dreamed of so easily? At the side, the Ape King looked at Xianxia as if he was looking at a god. He muttered in his heart, "If I get on good terms with him, will he be able to help me improve my cultivation? Alright, stop dreaming. Put on your clothes first. After I help you forge an immortal body, you will be considered to have truly stepped into the ranks of immortal cultivators. It's still too early to be happy." Xianxia waved his hand as if he was used to this scene. Looking at the old man's naked body was really boring. The Nanming Patriarch was a little too excited. He no longer cared about being shy. After putting on his clothes, he obediently stood beside Xianxia and waited for instructions. In the past, he had never been so obedient in front of Bai Changchun. Xianxia also wanted to hurry up and get things done. He had too many things on hand and had no time to waste. Thus he led the Nanming Patriarch outside and the two of them flew to the peak of Flaming Mountain. How could the Ape King let go of such an opportunity to broaden his horizons? He braced himself and followed them. After Yu Qianzhou told the Nanming patriarch some things to take note of, he glanced at the Ape King who was standing nearby and watching weakly. He secretly pinched the purple flames in each of his palms and placed them on his back. He stood on the peak of the mountain with the demeanor of a grandmaster. Facing the heaven and earth, he shouted, "There is righteousness in the heaven and earth. Wind, fire, thunder, and lightning, listen to my command." Chapter 948. Why did these words sound so familiar? In fact, it was half-baked. Upon hearing this, Ancestor Nanming, who was sitting cross-legged on the ground, pondered for a moment and immediately became spirited. Especially the opening line, "Heaven and earth have righteousness." Wasn't this the mantra of Bai Chongqun's starting gesture? As expected of Bai Chongqun's disciple, it was Bai Chongqun's personal great technique. Now he could rest assured. Ancestor Nanming's nervous heart calmed down. He had misgivings about Yu Qianzhou's character, but he still had confidence in the ability that Bai Chongqun had taught him. That old fellow who had fought against heaven and earth and presided over the demon domain for 1,000 years was not just any ordinary person. He could be said to be a peerless genius. Now that things had come to this, he was the first to comfort himself. Little did he know that the skill that Yu Qianzhou was using now had nothing to do with his master, Bai Chongqun. He just wanted to take the opportunity to intimidate the Ape King, which could be considered as giving his hero army an extra layer of protection in the divine ruin realm. However, this guy wanted to make himself more majestic and wondered if he should say something to increase his momentum. After thinking about it, he still felt that the old man's style was the most domineering. Every word and action was sparkling. Thus, he conveniently adapted and borrowed it, but in terms of momentum he was still a little inferior to his master. One was putting on an act, while the other was communicating with the mantra of heaven and earth. At least in terms of tone, he lacked that kind of confidence that was deep in his bones. Putting on an act was just putting on an act. In fact, how could the little tricks of demons and monsters be compared to the majesty of true righteousness? There was no comparison at all. However, coupled with his follow-up methods, it was enough to scare people. "Heaven and earth have righteousness, wind, fire, thunder, and lightning, listen to my command, wind rises and clouds surge." The Ape King's brain turned to reflect on the meaning of this sentence. He thought to himself, what a big tone. Isn't he afraid of losing his tongue? Using thunder and lightning to cast a body? Let's see how you can create thunder and lightning in a clear sky. Just as he turned his head to look at the clear sky, a gust of wind suddenly blew over. The black smoke coming out of the cave in the middle of the mountain was immediately blown into a blur. His fiery red long hair was also blown around by the strong wind, causing it to dance wildly in the wind. It's really windy?" The Ape King was slightly startled. Suddenly he saw that the clear sky was gradually turning gray and hazy. He did not know if it was because of the billowing black smoke that was being blown away behind him. However, the gradually darkening sky told him the answer. Rolling dark clouds gradually gathered in the sky. When the dark clouds shrouded the entire sky, the world became dark and oppressive. Rumble. A dull and shocking thunder rumbled in the dark clouds. Even through the dark clouds, the thunder still shone brightly on the vast land. Although Ancestor Nanming and the Ape King had vaguely guessed what was going to happen next, they were still shocked when they saw the wind, clouds, and rolling thunder appear out of nowhere. Could it be that the wind, fire, thunder, and lightning in the world really listened to him? Ancestor Nanming suddenly looked at Yu Qianzhou, who had the demeanor of a grandmaster and was facing heaven and earth with his hands clasped behind his back. He could not help but sigh inwardly. He is indeed Bai Chongqun's disciple and the punishment envoy of the demon region. I wonder how high his cultivation is now. A bolt of lightning descended from the dark clouds and descended on the vast land. It was a vast expanse of green in front of him, which immediately pulled Ancestor Nanming's attention back. He looked up and saw that the dark clouds were already filled with electric snakes, and the image of thunder and lightning was ready to strike. The violent wind blew endlessly, causing the clothes of the three of them to flutter loudly. The Ape King looked at the scene of heaven and earth changing color and instantly felt that he was so small under the power of heaven and earth. It was as if a gust of wind could blow him away without a trace. "Mr. Nanming, it's about to begin. Get ready." Yu Qianzhou glanced at the Ape King as he said this. If it was not for the sake of intimidating this fellow, there was no need to make such a big commotion. In fact, he was now very familiar with the control of thunder and lightning. He did not need to make a big scene to help Ancestor Nanming cast his body. Right. All right. Ancestor Nanming's voice was a little shaky. How could he know that Yu Qianqiu made such a big scene just to watch? The thunderbolt was aimed at him. It was too frightening. He was trembling with fear as he guessed whether he could withstand it or not. Brat, you better not fail. There was no time for him to think too much. Rumble. A bolt of lightning had already drilled out of the dark clouds and instantly struck his body. Sizzle sizzle. Rings of electricity flowed up and down his body, which was sitting cross-legged. Ancestor Nanming's mind was blank at first. When he recovered, he realized that Yu Qianqiu had perfect control of the power of thunder and lightning. He immediately heaved a sigh of relief and began to improve his body according to Yu Qianqiu's instructions. He could really control thunder and lightning. The Ape King stared at the bolt of lightning that connected heaven and earth in bewilderment. It hung between heaven and earth and kept sizzling and twisting, not disappearing. This scene made his mind go blank as well, as if the lightning had struck him. When he slowly came back to his senses, he felt that the unparalleled power of heaven and earth could actually be controlled by someone. He looked at Yu Qianqiu with eyes full of reverence. When the bolt of lightning that connected heaven and earth retracted back into the sky, the sound of thunder in the dark clouds gradually subsided. The lightning disappeared and the dark clouds also began to dissipate rapidly. In a short while, the blue sky was once again supported by the sun. Everything was like a dream or an illusion. The Ape King, who had witnessed this scene with his own eyes, dared not believe that it was real. However, in front of him, the naked Master Nanming stood up slowly. He was laughing wildly with his arms wide open. This had already explained everything. Otherwise, not many old fellows would be so excited to the point of being so shameless and frank. He had forgotten himself. I say, old fellow, don't you think you should put on your clothes? It was truly unsightly. Yu Qianqiu tilted his head to look at the horizon and sneered. You dare to compete with heaven and earth whose bird is bigger? You're the only one in the 3 realms. Aren't you afraid of heaven's wrath? Nanming Ancestor's neck tightened as if someone was choking him. He hurriedly took out his clothes and put them on. The awkwardness was just a fleeting moment for him. Compared to his cultivation reaching the immortal realm and successfully forging an immortal body, everything else was just fleeting clouds. Now he could live forever. Yu Qianqiu, everything is ready now. What treasure do you want to refine? We can start working now. Nanming Ancestor moved to Yu Qianqiu's side and smiled awkwardly. In his entire life, it was people who begged him to refine treasures. This was the first time he took the initiative to ask for permission. Even Bai Changchun did not enjoy such treatment when he was in his hands. However, who asked him to receive such a great benefit from others? It would be inexcusable if he did not express his gratitude. Under their gazes, Yu Qianqiu muttered to himself for a moment before saying, "Go and make your preparations. I'll decide what I want to refine when I return." With the combination of strength and gentleness, he had already subdued both master and disciple. Since he had put in so much effort, it was only natural that he would receive something in return. His tone of voice already carried a hint of ordering his subordinates around. With these words, he transformed into a stream of light and swiftly flew into the distance. In the valley within the misty sea of fog, after Zhang Ping sent his men to investigate the surrounding terrain, he quickly arranged for the army to construct appropriate fortifications on the spot. Bunkers and hidden sentry posts radiated out from the valley in all directions. Inside the valley, Yu Qianqiu and Zhang Ping, the master and disciple duo, gathered a few others together. They kept using the soil to conduct some sort of experiment. After they were done, Zhang Ping quickly led them away. After Yu Qianqiu made a few rounds around the enormous underground works in the valley, Zhang Pingfang returned with a few jade archives and handed them to him. Yu Qianqiu then left after leaving some instructions to Zhang Pingfang. Zhang Pingfang had no idea what he was up to. With the jade archives in hand, Yu Qianqiu excitedly rushed back to Mount Great Flaming. When he barged into the cave and saw the master and disciple from Nanming, he waved the jade archives in his hand and said, "Let's get to work. Let's get to work." He put away the jade archives and leaped onto the huge pitch-black platform. Grandmaster Nanming flashed to his side and asked curiously, "What kind of treasure are you planning to refine?" Yu Qianqiu sized up the size of the huge pitch-black platform, then asked, I want to refine a batch of armor. What do you think? Using the extraterrestrial metal to refine armor? Grandmaster Nanming was stunned. Isn't that too much of a waste? Normal armor won't do. With you around, can't you refine them all into treasures? As Yu Qianqiu spoke, he was suddenly stunned. He looked at Grandmaster Nanming and smiled. Extraterrestrial metal? Looks like you've already come up with a name for this item. It's a good name. Let's call the refined armor the extraterrestrial metal armor. Grandmaster Nanming was speechless. What was he talking about? Nanming, I've already thought of the appearance of the extraterrestrial metal armor. What do you think? Yu Qianqiu said to himself as he took a few steps back. He slowly opened his arms, and the pupils of Grandmaster Nanming and Ape King suddenly shrank. They saw that the huge pitch-black platform suddenly seemed to come alive. Like a group of black ants, they climbed up from under Yu Qianqiu's feet and quickly covered Yu Qianqiu's entire body. A Yu Qianqiu wearing armor with only a pair of eyes revealed stood in front of the master and disciple. That wasn't the end of it. The armor continued to change its outer shape. Small and sharp spikes that were about 1 centimeter long covered the surface of the armor. Especially on the shoulders, there were 3 1-inch spikes in a triangular shape. There were also 1-inch spikes on the elbows and the backs of the palms, knees and soles of the feet. There was even a long sword on his back. The entire armor looked abnormally ferocious and evil. Dang, ding, dang. Yu Qianqiu walked a few steps in the armor. He scolded in a low, muffled voice through the dozens of small holes on his mouth that almost covered his entire face. Damn it, the extraterrestrial metal is indeed a little too heavy. I can't kill others like this, and I'm so clumsy that I can only wait for others to kill me. Then he turned his head and looked at Grandmaster Nanming. Nanming, what do you think is the most suitable thickness? Grandmaster Nanming didn't know whether to laugh or cry as he walked in front of him. He looked at the thickness of the armor around his eyes and found that it was at least 1 centimeter thick. He said weakly, it's too thick. In addition to the spikes all over your body, it would be strange if it wasn't heavy. Let's reduce it by 90%. Chapter 949. 90% thinner? Yu Qianqiu was like a cat whose tail had been stepped on. He shrieked, then isn't it only 1 millimeter thick? It's too thin, too thin. No, it can't block anything. Can that still be considered armor? If it wasn't for the weight, I'd think it's too thin for 1 centimeter. 1 millimeter isn't thin. Nanming Patriarch tried his best to explain, don't forget what this is. This is the metal essence from beyond the heavens. With just this 1 millimeter thickness, even if you let Yuan Hong use all of his strength, he wouldn't be able to break through it. If it wasn't for the fact that we have to add a formation to it and that we need a certain thickness when refining it again, I think it'd be better to make it thinner. If someone's cultivation is so high that they can break through the metal essence from beyond the heavens, it'd be useless even if you add another meter. They can still break through it. Moreover, after adding a formation inside, its defense will be greatly increased. What you said makes sense. As he spoke, the armor on his body retreated like the tide, merging back into the large black platform beneath his feet. Yu Qianqiu waved the remaining thin piece in his hand and said, "Wait for me, I'll be back soon." He rushed out of the belly of the mountain. He had to find someone to test whether this 1 millimeter thickness was solid or not. The master and disciple looked at each other, not knowing what he was going to do. Suddenly, Nanming Patriarch noticed that Ape King's forehead was drenched in sweat. He couldn't help but ask curiously, "What's wrong with you?" Ape King wiped his sweat and stared at the black platform in a daze. He then asked with lingering fear, "Master, just how high is his cultivation?" He was truly frightened by Yu Qianqiu's methods. He had used 50,000 years to accumulate the metal essence from beyond the heavens in the belly of the mountain. Now that he saw Yu Qianqiu using it as if it was a toy, it was no different from having a nightmare. "You're asking me?" Nanming Patriarch shook his head and smiled bitterly. "Who should I ask? I don't know what level his cultivation has reached, but in short he can't be predicted with common sense. He's a monster." On the 22nd floor of the World Chamber of Commerce, a door opened and Yu Qianqiu rushed out. He flew to the side of Wei Chuanqiu, who was sitting cross-legged at the door. He first glanced inside the door, then casually set up a soundproof barrier. Holding the thin piece of extraterrestrial metal essence armor plate that was only 1 millimeter thick, He waved it in front of Wei Chuanqiu, who was sitting cross-legged with his eyes closed, and said, "Bat King Wei, look what I've brought you." Wei Chuanqiu opened her eyes without hesitation. She stared blankly at the black object in front of her for a while. Then she stood up and asked suspiciously, "Why are you so kind as to give me something good? Isn't it just a piece of broken metal? What good is this?" "Hehe. You don't know this. Took me a lot of effort to get this thing." Yu Qianchou smiled sinisterly as he waved the thing in his hand and said, "This is called extraterrestrial metal essence. Don't be fooled by its small size, but its defense is amazing. I can guarantee that even if you use all your cultivation you won't be able to break it." "Are you serious? It's really as powerful as you say?" Wei Chuanqiu's eyes lit up. She was instantly intrigued by Yu Qianchou and was about to reach out to take a look. Unexpectedly, Yu Qianchou hid it behind him and said with a smile, "Since you don't believe me, let's make a bet?" Wei Chuanqiu immediately became alert and sneered, "What bet? I think you're up to no good again. What extraterrestrial metal essence? I've never heard of it. It's just a piece of broken metal. You can give it to me if you want, but I don't care." "Look at you. I told you that you don't believe me. If this is considered a piece of broken metal, then there's nothing good in this world." Yu Qianchou took out the piece of metal from behind him with a look of disdain and sighed, "How about this? In order to verify that this piece of metal you said is really indestructible, let's make a bet. If you can't break it, then I'm sorry. I'll take it back and not give it to you. If you can break it, then I'll give it to you." Really indestructible? Wei Chuanqiu thought that whether she gave it to him or not, there was no loss to her. She took the thing in her hand and flicked it with her finger. In the end, she found that it was really not an ordinary thing. Her eyes lit up again and she immediately became spirited. "How is it? I didn't lie to you, did I?" Yu Qianchou urged, "Quickly try it and see if you can break it." With a dang sound, Wei Chuanqiu's finger touched it with a green light. Then they put their heads together and looked at it. There was no mark on it at all. Wei Chuanqiu immediately exclaimed, and then a series of green light poked on the broken piece of metal. After a series of dang 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 sounds, there were some slight scratches on it, but it was far from being damaged. Such a thin thing was actually so indestructible. Wei Chuanqiu immediately clicked her tongue and said in surprise, "It's really a good thing." Of course. Yu Qianchou was delighted, but he didn't forget to ask, "Old Bat, is that all you can do? Have you used all your cultivation? Just a little more. If you can't break it, I'll take it back." "Why are you in such a hurry?" Wei Chuanqiu rolled her eyes, then she mustered up her strength and poked the piece of metal for a while. However, only some slight scratches were left, which was really incredible. Wei Chuanqiu was still unwilling to give up. He held the two sides of the piece of metal and used all his strength to pry it open. "This thing is called extraterrestrial metal essence, right? Where did you get it? I really can't use my hands and feet here. Looks like I have to find a secluded place to attack it. Otherwise, it'll be really hard to break it open. This is a good thing. Can't be better to refine it into a treasure." The piece of metal showed signs of bending when he used so much strength, but once he relaxed, it immediately returned to its original shape. All right. Stop for a while." Yu Qianchou took the thing from his hand and put it away, saying, "Look at how strenuous you are. It'll be a waste if you continue." He turned around and left. He was satisfied that the experiment had reached this stage. Even Wei Bat King couldn't break it with his cultivation, so there was nothing more to say. If he let Elder Nan Ming refine it a little more, its defense would probably be even stronger. "It's fine as long as I know what I'm doing. I'll try again when the armor is done." "Yu Qianchou, don't go. I haven't used my full strength yet." "I'll try again," Wei Chuanqiu shouted from behind. He was prepared to trick Yu Qianchou into giving him such a good thing. Unfortunately, Yu Qianchou didn't fall for his trick at all. "Even if you're as treacherous as a ghost, you still have to drink the water I wash my feet with." Yu Qianchou turned around and chuckled. He waved his hand at Wei Chuanqiu and went into one of the rooms. Wei Chuanqiu looked at the guarded door behind him and thought for a while before sitting down cross-legged. However, just as he closed his eyes, he suddenly opened them again. In a flash, he chased after the room that Yu Qianchou had gone into. In the end, he discovered that Yu Qianchou had already disappeared. He immediately gritted his teeth. Only after he calmed down did he realize that he had been tricked by Yu Qianchou. Yu Qianchou had gone around in circles and didn't know how to react. He couldn't understand why he would be so stupid as to make such a bet with Yu Qianqiu. If the item couldn't be broken, it wouldn't be given to him. If it was broken, it would be given to him. Wouldn't he be at a disadvantage regardless of whether he won or lost? If things could be broken, why would he want a broken item? Is this kid too free? Why did he come here to play this game? Wei Chunqiu thought about it and found it strange. There didn't seem to be any benefits for Yu Qianqiu to make this bet. However, what he didn't know was that Yu Qianqiu was purely using him as an experiment. What would he think if he found out? In the belly of the great flaming mountain, Yu Qianqiu had already put on his armor again. After experimenting, he listened to Patriarch Nanming's suggestion and reduced the armor's thickness by 90%. Naturally, the weight was reduced by a lot. Then, under Patriarch Nanming's suggestion, he wore the armor and performed various body movements. The spikes that hindered the flexibility of his joints were all removed. The spikes on the inner parts of his limbs and the spikes that hindered the bending of certain parts of his body were all removed. As a result, the weight was greatly reduced. Finally, he made adjustments to the armor to make it more comfortable and human-like, so that it could be quickly put on and taken off at any time. After the weight was reduced, Yu Qianqiu pulled out the long sword on his back. He swung the sword around and flew a few rounds in the belly of the mountain before landing in front of Patriarch Nanming. He smiled and said, "Please help me refine this sword as well. Not only will this set of equipment have an indestructible defense, it will also have an unstoppable attack power. Please." As he said this, he sheathed the long sword on his back and took off the armor on his body. Patriarch Nanming smiled bitterly as he received the armor. He sighed and said, "I will do my best." "What are you doing?" In a flash, Yu Qianqiu returned to the pitch-black platform. He took out a few jade archives, held them in his hands and closed his eyes. The jade archives recorded the detailed data of the nearly 10,000 members of the hero army. The reason he had sought out Zhang Ping and the rest for this very moment. After a while, several hundred sets of armor slowly floated up from the large platform, surrounding Yu Qianqiu. None of the armor was empty. The parts that revealed their eye sockets were empty, but each of them stood straight with a long sword slung on their back. In addition, the uniform design of the armor made them look ferocious and terrifying. One couldn't help but suspect that they were ghostly soldiers of the netherworld who had crawled out from the ground. Yu Qianqiu opened his eyes, took out a storage bracelet and wore it on his wrist. He stored the several hundred sets of armor inside. This was only the first batch. Immediately after, several dozen batches of similar ferocious empty armors appeared on the pitch-black platform. In total, nearly 10,000 sets of ferocious empty armors were all stored inside the storage bracelet. After preparing all the sets of the hero army, Yu Qianqiu stopped. The 4-meter-thick platform beneath his feet was now only slightly more than a meter thick. At this moment, Yu Qianqiu took off the storage bracelet in his hand and took out an empty storage bracelet. He then walked towards the dumbfounded Patriarch Nanming.